This rebroadcast of Silicon Valley Leadership Group's 2023 Sustainable Growth Summit is brought to you by our thought leader sponsor. Thank you to Western Digital.
Our world. Our home. At multiple tipping points. Moving into a more destructive phase of climate change, and moving toward the right strategies to address our impacts. At Silicon Valley Leadership Group, we support California's transition to a reliable and affordable clean energy future. As a central part of the Survive and Thrive coalition, we believe high-quality transit is essential to more equitable communities that must address our region's housing crisis and ensure adequate housing is more accessible and affordable for everyone. SVLG and our member companies are committed to being a part of the solution for the most challenging issues that we all face. It's why we're proud to welcome Western Digital as our thought leader sponsor for Sustainable Growth 2023, the Energy, Sustainability, and Infrastructure Summit. As our industries and society move into the fourth industrial revolution, Western Digital has been leading on the transition in tech manufacturing, from digital twin factory optimization to automation-driven lights-out manufacturing, from autonomous robotic vehicle deployment to deep learning for production planning, changes that drive analytics-driven predictive procurement, intelligent planning, and streamlined distribution. And those fourth industrial revolution advances have driven major momentum in Western Digital's productivity. By coupling those advances with extensive worker upskilling programs, Western Digital has helped its employees adapt and transition into valuable new roles in advanced manufacturing. Western Digital's fourth industrial revolution enhancements have driven more than just productivity. They've driven significant sustainability. For Western Digital, it is about recognizing and realigning to the reality of the fourth industrial revolution, as it sculpts a new, more sustainable, and more efficient path forward, driven by technology, and changing everything from daily work to macroeconomics, and building the future, one data point at a time. For Silicon Valley Leadership Group, it is about harnessing the energy, the innovation, and the momentum of our members, and our greater Bay Area community, bringing together the problem solvers, the pioneers, the leaders, to find connection and direction, all to move us toward a more inclusive, equitable, and sustainable future for Silicon Valley and beyond. Welcome to Sustainable Growth 2023, presented by Western Digital.
Kicking things off for our event, SVLG's head of sustainable growth, Tim McRae.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Silicon Valley Leadership Group and our more than 300 member companies representing the innovation economy and its ecosystem, I'd like to welcome you to our 11th annual Energy and Sustainable Summit, brought to you by our title sponsor, Western Digital, and our host sponsor, Oracle. I'd also like to welcome the local elected officials who are here as guests. Please join me in a round of applause for them. My name is Tim McRae, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Sustainable Growth here at SVLG. I have the pleasure of not only opening today's summit, but you'll see me later in a conversation with Tom Steyer. However, before I get to a rundown of today's program, including what you can expect, I want to take a moment and introduce you to the new SVLG. As many of you know, SVLG is celebrating its 45th year of policy impact, advocacy, and driving impact. We've updated our structure and approach to both align with where we are today and to build on our rich history right here in the Valley. So if you're a long-time attendee of ESS and other events, you may have noticed that things look and feel different. Well, I'm here to confirm that your suspicions are true. Things look and feel different because they are different. At SVLG, we continue to prioritize market-moving legislation and investments. But we are also working to accelerate the next era of Silicon Valley leadership. We've updated our internal structure, moving from committees to 3 targeted areas of work. And we continue to work via policy advocacy and programmatic work to drive a new vision of corporate citizenship for Silicon Valley that includes environmental, social, and governance, or ESG. Okay, so now to today's summit. Our theme is sustainable growth. This is the area of work that I lead, and we're going to spend the day talking about top-of-mind issues and opportunities when it comes to housing, transportation, and energy. As shown in the video, we're in the middle of the 4th industrial revolution. And at SVLG, at the heart of our work is a commitment to create a more sustainable, equitable, and inclusive future for the innovation economy and its ecosystem. So we built our program not only to delve into where we are today on these subjects, but also to highlight where we're going. We face a clear and urgent set of challenges. When it comes to climate, the transportation sector remains the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. Public transit is in crisis coming out of the COVID-19 lockdowns. The Bay Area and Silicon Valley remain the most expensive housing market in the United States. But there is a bright side. California and the Valley continue to lead when it comes to technology and innovation. ESG is more than buzzwords here. Specifically, prioritization, integration, and disclosure are a strategic imperative for all corporations. Additionally, we have landmark legislation that will bring significant federal investment to the state when it comes to energy, infrastructure, housing, and environment. We will touch on all these topics today, and if we do our job, you'll leave here not only with a better understanding of the current state of play, but also energized and inspired about where we're headed and the key role that the innovation economy and its ecosystem are playing towards our sustainable future. Now, we'll hear a few words from one of California's top leaders who isn't able to join us in person, but is leading the charge on climate and infrastructure work, our Governor, Gavin Newsom.
Well, hey everybody, it's Governor Gavin Newsom here, and I don't need to explain to you where you are. You're here in the great state of California, a state of dreamers, doers, entrepreneurs, innovators. You know that. A state that prides itself on being on the leading and cutting edge of new ideas. More scientists, more researchers, more Nobel laureates, more patents emanating out of this state than any other state in the nation. Eat your heart out, Texas. Eat your heart out, Florida. We're also well on the way of becoming the 4th largest economy, dare I say, eat your heart out, Germany. And that's because all of you helped us get there. But we also know we're at a turning point, a tipping point, a precipice of sorts of a new era for our environment, for our communities, and for our economy. And all the good work we've done to get as far as we've gotten may not be enough to continue to maintain our leadership. We need to step up our game because the world we invented in so many ways, in shapes and forms, is competing against us. So as we set ambitious goals, we need to do everything to actually reach them, to manifest our ideals. And that means we need to do more and we need to do it faster. More clean energy projects, more infrastructure, more transportation projects, bridges, roads, you name it, fill in the blank, which in turn, by definition, keep the economy turning and churning, creating hundreds of thousands of good jobs, the tentpole of the American economy. And that's why just a few weeks ago, I proposed the most ambitious effort in our state's at least modern history to cut red tape and streamline regulations. We're doing it to save time, to save money, to save our reputation, to make our democracy work, to distill a sense of well-being and optimism in the state, and yes, to make ourselves more competitive for federal funding. But we need your help to make that happen. Silicon Valley's home, I hate even saying this because it's so obvious and you know it, some of the world's greatest minds and boldest innovators. You've driven new developments and sustainability to tackle the climate crisis, and you're delivering economic opportunity for all Californians. But I notably want to highlight the great work of Ahmad Thomas and his team that are working hard in Sacramento right now to convince the legislature to pass these bills quickly. Just want to thank you for that. And if we go by the track record, your track record in the past, we have plenty of reasons to feel optimism and hope. And with your support, with your muscle, we've made a lot of strides, not just in terms of the recent permitting and procurement bills, but over the last few years across the spectrum of issue, particularly on housing. But this may be our biggest push yet. So we need to go together by unleashing the full potential of this extraordinary place we call home and show the world and our nation what we can do together.
Hello, everyone. I'm Riley Robbins, SVP of Media for SVLG, and your announcer for today's Sustainable Growth Summit presented by Western Digital. Before we go any further, a little housekeeping. If you've not already done so, please take a moment to download the Equilar Engage app. The QR codes are on your table in the white frames. There's one for Android and one for iOS. Use the email you registered for the conference with in order to access the event. From here, you can check out the full schedule, speaker bios, visit our sponsor pages, and most importantly for today, submit questions for the audience Q&A segments. For social media, you'll see the hashtag for the event, SustGrowth23. Make sure to post and share, and Wi-Fi is available using the code on the paper on your table. With that, it's time to kick off our program and our official welcome from our host, Oracle. Joining us now is John Chorley, Oracle's Chief Sustainability Officer. He is responsible for leading the company's initiatives to deliver efficient, clean, and circular cloud infrastructure for their customers as we all work towards a net zero future. Please join me now in welcoming John Chorley to the stage.
Well, hello and welcome. It's wonderful to see you here all today. Oracle is proud to have supported Silicon Valley Leadership Group's Energy, Sustainability and Infrastructure Conference for the last 10 years. And we're really pleased to see you all here today on our campus in Redwood Shores. We do have an extraordinary selection of speakers with us here today. In particular, we're privileged to have with us Secretary of U.S. Department of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, also Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Michael Regan, and climate investor, philanthropist, and businessman Tom Steyer with us for today's summit. I think this level of participation reflects both the importance of the subjects we're discussing here today, as well as the strength of this forum, which brings together business, technology, the government, and the public. For our own part, here at Oracle, we are progressing towards our goal of being 100% renewable energy powered for our data center and real estate operations by 2025. Also driving down our total emissions by 50% by 2030, with a goal of being net zero by 2050. And more importantly, we're investing constantly in the technology, the applications, the solutions to help our customers set, and more importantly, to meet their own climate goals. With sustainable growth as today's theme for this year's event, I'm excited about how we can all work together to achieve the future, and I expect that this summit, this forum, will be an important part of our journey towards that goal. In this room, we are all leaders in this journey, taking the necessary steps to transform our own businesses and organizations using innovative technologies, processes, and policies. And like we like to say at Oracle, sustainability is everyone's business. So I hope you enjoy the day and learn a great deal from today's environmental and business leaders about innovations in addressing sustainability and energy challenges and infrastructure challenges associated with climate change. With that, I would like to introduce Madison Vanderclay, Senior Associate for Senior Leadership Group, who will introduce our first panel, Driving Change, the Evolution of Transportation. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Madison Vanderclay with Silicon Valley Leadership Group. I'm a Senior Policy Associate here, and it is my pleasure to welcome you today to the Sustainable Growth Summit. I am very excited to be introducing our next fireside chat on zero-emission vehicles, otherwise known as ZEVs. The past couple of years have marked a turning point in zero-emission vehicle adoption. In California, there are more than 1.5 million EVs on the roads, 2 years ahead of schedule. Legislation continues to pave the way for increasing adoption. And there are unprecedented levels of investment coming from the federal government through the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, two landmark pieces of legislation that have the potential to transform charging and energy infrastructure across the nation. And while these achievements and our ongoing activity highlight how far the clean mobility economy has come, they also illustrate how far we have left to go. And this brings me to the conversation we're about to bring to the stage in this next section called Driving Change, the Evolution of Transportation. Again, it is worth restating. We've come a long way when it comes to transitioning to ZEVs. We're past the chicken and the egg conversation, and right now in the middle of a simultaneous rollout of both vehicles and infrastructure. And there are two participants we are about to bring out who are at the forefront of this change. From them, you'll not only hear about the work underway to make sure EVs are a viable option for everyone, but you'll also learn a little more about the role of technology and innovation, specifically as it relates to newer models of travel and how key players are working in support of zero-emission goals. You are absolutely in for a treat. Dr. Shelley Francis is co-founder and managing partner at EV Noir, where she leads a team of engineers, data scientists, policy leads, and e-mobility professionals. She is a technical expert when it comes to best practices, and her work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as her research into the public health impacts of transportation emissions, are frequently sought out in both the public and private sectors. If you were like me and watched the Biden-Harris administration's announcement from the White House, where the EPA announced the strongest ever emission standards for trucks and cars, you would have seen Dr. Francis at the mic. Talking with her is Seth Smith, California Policy and Communications Manager at Uber, a proud member company of SVLG. Uber has been working in support of EVs for quite some time, and based on their experience both in the US and internationally, are arguably leading the way when it comes to zero-emission rideshare. As part of his work there, he helps coordinate their commitment to being a zero-emission platform by 2030, and we are proud to spotlight the work that they do. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Shelley Francis and Seth Smith.
Test, test.
Okay.
Sounds like we're on.
Good morning, everybody. Oh, I can hear
Good
myself.
morning.
Yes.
First, I'd like to thank Oracle for hosting us here today and the Silicon Valley Leadership Group for convening this summit. Dr. Francis, let's jump right in.
Okay, let's go.
There is no one-size-fits-all solution for either companies or consumers when it comes to accelerating ZEV adoption. Can you tell us about EV Noir's approach to increasing ZEV adoption, specifically when it comes to Black and Latino communities?
Absolutely. So let me start off first by describing who we are and what we do. So usually before I start these conversations, I do like to know how many current EV drivers there are in the room. And because this is California, it's gonna look a lot different from other places in the country where both Seth and I speak. Okay, fabulous, thank you. So EV Noir, we're a consultancy. We work on electric connected, shared, and autonomous mobility solutions. Within that space, I lead, along with some of our co-managing partners, we lead a team of engineers, data and research scientists, charging infrastructure specialists, policy consultants, as well as e-mobility consultants. And so we work with auto manufacturers, charging infrastructure companies, rideshare and delivery network companies. We've been working with the 25 largest cities, along with smaller cities and smaller under 150,000. We're also working with nonprofits, academia, and the list could go on. But essentially, we're working collectively with these communities and partners to decarbonize their fleets. So we're working with them to create strategy as well as implement the strategy to decarbonize fleets, but also do it in a way that's reflective of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's one piece of the work that we lead in this space. The second phase, where we would target more specifically diverse communities and those communities that are underrepresented in the clean transportation conversation, is with our nonprofit, which is EV Hybrid Noir. So EV Hybrid Noir is the nation's largest network of diverse EV drivers and enthusiasts. And so we have thousands of members across the country, as well as in Europe, Canada, Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. And our membership skews primarily Black and Hispanic. And we have memberships within the United States across most major markets. And within our organization, the focus or mission is to equitably accelerate EV awareness, as well as multimodal clean transportation adoption. So that's everything from scooters and e-bikes up to medium and heavy duty freight electrification. So our members are trained to do advocacy. So whether it's going to their local leadership, the State House, or testifying between EPA on clean vehicle standard hearings, they're trained to do advocacy. They also do outreach and engagement, targeting their communities. So it's really important to have spokespersons that are reflective of those communities, talking about EV adoption and normalizing the behavior. Because one of the things that we've seen in our research is that when you ask people, particularly Black and Hispanic community members and individuals, what an EV driver looks like, they don't say it looks like myself and Seth. And myself, I've been driving an electric vehicle for the last 6 or so years, and my first electric vehicle was less than $10,000. And so when they hear that narrative from myself or others that look like them and are reflective of their communities and can really talk about what was the impetus for them to make that transition from an ICE vehicle, it really resonates, and it's very impactful. And so for us, we want to normalize EV adoption. We want to make sure that consumer education and outreach and engagement is reflective of those communities. And then we also want to continue to make sure that we're advocating for building out EV charging infrastructure in a way that's equitable and accessible, not just for Black and brown communities, but also for rural communities, tribal and indigenous communities, and those for individuals that have specific needs around ADA. So we want to make sure that our accelerating our transition is really, truly accessible to all communities.
That's great, and that brings me to my next question, actually. California recently achieved its goal of putting 1.5 million zero-emission vehicles on the road 2 years early. From your point of view, what contributed to this early success, and what should others who are looking to replicate this success be thinking? Also, where's California falling short?
Okay, so let me go into my files on this one. But no, specifically, these are some of the ways that California has been successful. So creating a policy culture or a policy environment that's supportive to ZEVs. So one of the things that obviously California has done well, and I'm sure many of you are from right here in California, is that California has issued the ZEV mandates, which requires manufacturers to produce and sell a certain number of ZEVs in California. There's also been different financial incentives and rebates, as well as tax credits, to really accelerate EV adoption. And so one of the things that we know is successful and effective in accelerating EV adoption in more progressive countries and markets, when you look at a Norway, that's some of the things and the strategies that they've implemented. So that's one thing. Another thing that California is doing well, or has done to help reach this number and this goal, or really exceed it, is that building out charging infrastructure. So being intentional in terms of addressing charging infrastructure gaps and needs is going to be one of the ways that you're going to accelerate EV adoption, not just with the early adopter crowd, but with mass markets and diverse communities. Also, another strategy is around consumer education and outreach. So making sure that all communities have access to information about electric vehicles, and it's in a manner that's culturally appropriate. So is it in the language that this community speaks in? Are there people that look like members in this community? Are there people who are driving those vehicles in this community being part of those spokespeople that can talk about the experience? Also, public-private partnerships are really important. So making sure like you're engaging with different stakeholder groups to really leverage resources and leverage best practice and leverage strategies that are going to work well. And so I could go on and on. But those are some of the strategies that have initially worked really well. I think moving forward, some of the ways that we here in California and others outside of California, because I don't live in California, but what others can take away from the California model is some of those points that I've addressed, but also looking at innovation around research and development and charging infrastructure, obviously battery technology. Some very difficult concepts to crack or nuts to crack include charging infrastructure. So while we're accelerating charging infrastructure, both with private sector investment and public sector investment with the recent policies from the federal government, there's still a lot of gaps. And so in order to accelerate EV adoption, we've got to be able to figure out the multifamily charging infrastructure needs, but really making sure that we have charging infrastructure from a residential, workplace, and community standpoint is some of the ways that we're going to be able to move this conversation forward.
Absolutely. What do you think about companies and public policymakers building on this momentum to meet the governor's goal of 100% light-duty zero-emission vehicle sales by 2035? How do you think that there's a clear path for us to achieve that?
So, there are different examples, but it takes people like those folks here in the room, as well as folks that we're hoping to train and encourage them to come into the mobility sector to be able to address some of those issues. So one of the things that actually we've done in our work is that, looking across the room, thank you all for coming to this space, but there still needs to be more diverse people. So we need more Black or African American, Hispanic thought leaders, Native and tribal indigenous leaders, folks who come from rural communities, other communities who have been underrepresented in this conversation around clean energy and clean transportation, because they can bring their lived experiences to those conversations, and so that they can inform some of the challenges and some of the gaps that we see in the space by sharing that diverse perspective that isn't always represented in the room where these policy decisions are being made or pilots are being discussed. So I think it's really critical that in order to, yes, meet that 2035 goal and the objectives, is that if we're intentional about bringing all facets of the clean transportation community and the end user into the conversation, I think we'll see a lot of progress, and we'll even come up with some more innovative strategies that will help us reach those goals potentially even earlier than we intend.
That's very optimistic, and I appreciate that. And
I like to see the glass half full.
I appreciate it. I wonder if that perspective comes out of your previous career in medicine. You brought your years of experience in health to the EV policy world. How does your past in the medical field influence your passion for transportation, decarbonization, and equity?
Sure, absolutely. So for those in the room who are not aware, I come from this conversation, used to be a medical professor and researcher looking at social determinants of health and health disparities. And so the social determinants of health framework is simply a framework that looks at where people live, work, where they're born, they live, work, and age, and understanding how those different facets, so it's access to access to transportation broadly. I'm always thinking clean transportation, but it's access to transportation, access to a medical home, it's having access to fresh fruits and vegetables, a clean environment. So how are all those things intersecting with your health and well-being? And then at the same time, I'm looking at these issues from a health disparities lens. So why are certain communities disproportionately impacted by certain phenomena? So like transportation emissions and pollution. Well, you can very clearly see that there have been transportation policies. There's a legacy of inequality when you go back and look at 1896 and the Plessy versus Ferguson landmark that said separate but equal in transportation, and how over the last 100+ years that has been integrated into social policy, housing covenants. You have residential segregation and housing discrimination, issues with loans and car loans, home loans, et cetera. So it's all kind of intersecting. So for us and for me, as I think about this from like that public health, medical lens, I can't think about transportation and mobility without thinking about the intersection between race and place. And so when you look at data, the number one reason or the number one way to understand somebody's health and well-being is looking at their zip code. 70% of Black people live in communities that are disproportionately impacted by air pollution. So I'm thinking about all of those types of data points and how it integrates with transportation and equity. And so that's the lens that I bring to this conversation, into this space.
That's wonderful to hear. Uber is also committed to an equitable transition to zero-emission vehicles for drivers on our platform. We've committed $800 million to our Green Future program and incentivized drivers to purchase EVs. What challenges, from your perspective, do rideshare drivers continue to face in accessing EVs?
Yeah. So rideshare drivers are a really unique and special community, but I think let's talk about first, give the audience a better understanding of what the Green Fund, what the incentive and rebate program is for the Uber transition.
Absolutely.
So then they can dive into the research results.
Yes, so the $800 million we've committed is being spent in several different ways. Some of it is updated features in the app, many of which have been announced just this morning with our Go Get Zero event out of London. This includes features in the driver side app that allow drivers to make cost comparisons between internal combustion engine vehicles and zero-emission vehicles when considering a new purchase or lease. It also includes map features for drivers to not only direct them to charging infrastructure, but help them plan their day around charging, along with information on pricing and such. We've also partnered with Hertz and Tesla for Hertz to purchase 50,000 Teslas for use in the US and Canada by Uber drivers, or for the purpose of Uber drivers. And this is a very popular program among drivers. And we see this being a very equitable program, not intentionally, as it were, but accidentally, because not all drivers on the rideshare platform have the same capability to purchase a zero-emission vehicle, not only from the potential cost of a down payment, but also just the qualification for financing. And so the ability to have a rental entry-level vehicle program helps them earn more than they would be on an internal combustion engine, and ideally save over time and transition to a lease-to-own or purchase of a full vehicle on their own. So that's just a few of the announcements that were made today regarding our green program. We also have a few on the sustainability side with regard to delivery as well, but we'll stick with rides for now.
So you all got to hear like a secret a release first for this conversation.
The announcements were made this morning in London, but yes, the announcements were made this morning in London, so we're just a few hours behind, but they are public now.
Yes. Yeah. So now I'll talk a little bit more about the research in terms from the rideshare driver perspective. So one of the things that we noticed early on in the conversation is that there's a very different, there's some gaps around the driver, what the drivers think being an EV owner or a driver is on the rideshare platform versus what it's really like. And so the way we've been working with Uber, we started working with you all before the announcement came out back in 2020. But since that time, we've been engaging with the rideshare community as well as other key stakeholders who are part of this clean transportation lexicon. And the idea is that in order to help accelerate this transition, we need to understand the end user's perspective and experience so that we can help them utilize the different rebates and incentives that you all are offering. So one of the things that we looked at, or just some of the themes that we looked at, were their driving habits, what's the best way to engage with them in terms of marketing, communications, and outreach. We also wanted to understand their knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs about clean transportation and electric vehicles, understand barriers to adoption, and what are the specific needs that they have around accelerating their transition. And here's what we learned. So in terms of EV drivers specifically, the things that they really enjoyed about being an EV driver on the rideshare platform was that they mentioned the cost savings. That was a big piece of it. They also mentioned like not having to think about maintenance. I can understand that because I'm sure all of you who are EV drivers know that your maintenance consists of tires every few years, and for some of those of you who may be driving it, who like to drive fast, you may go through tires a little bit quicker, but it's a windshield wipers and windshield wiper fluid. So that's what we have in terms of maintenance. The drivers also mentioned cool technology, just so, you know, having this vehicle is like having like a spaceship. Now, in terms of the ICE vehicle or the internal combustion vehicle owners, they shared uncertainty about EV adoption and use. They shared feedback about concerns around range, vehicle costs and access, limited charging infrastructure. Particularly, we heard that among folks who live in residential properties and apartments. And then, let's see, overall, what we did here was that there's a perception of higher upfront costs to make that transition. There's perceived lack of charging infrastructure. There's also that thought that the vehicles aren't big enough. They're not going to be able to fit their passengers and their luggage, et cetera. And again, the charging infrastructure concerns. But I want to end or leave you with a couple things on what they want. So what they want is they want improved communication about EVs. They want opportunities to touch, feel, and experience the technology. They also want to be communicated via the app and emails in terms of finding out more information. They want opportunities to test drive the vehicles, as well as participate in rental programs, which of course you guys are offering. We actually just facilitated a ride and drive kind of driver engagement event in Boston last week with the Uber team. And I mean, there were hundreds of drivers there, and about a quarter of those drivers signed up right after the event with the Hertz team that was on site for their rental program. So I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunities, but again, we have to bring the technology to the community, to the consumer group that we're targeting, to be able to address all of their questions, or at least maybe not all, but the majority of their questions in one setting.
Let's expand on one piece of that to finish our conversation here. I think it's something that's going to get brought up a little bit later today as well at the summit. What do you think needs to be done to encourage landlords and homeowners groups to install charging infrastructure for multifamily dwellings and apartment complexes and things like that?
So one, consumer education. The other piece is partnering with both private and public and private stakeholders, so partnering with utilities and cooperatives so that we can provide incentives and rebates to defray the cost of installing charging infrastructure, working with developers on the front end to provide charging infrastructure. I think taking a step back from the developer conversation is working with cities. So we've had the opportunity, as I mentioned, prior to working with the 25 largest cities as well as with smaller cities. Some of the work that we've done has been around building code ordinances. So working with cities and communities to put those things in place. And also, obviously, there's a lot of NEVI funding coming around, but initially it's, corridor charging, then community charging, and then we hope we'll be able to get some additional rebates and support. But we have a national conference that talks about all of those issues, so I would encourage you all to check out our national e-mobility, diversity, equity, and inclusion conference, and that's at e-mobility.dniconference.com.
Wonderful. Dr. Francis, it's so lovely to see you again, and I very much appreciated our conversation today. Thank you all for listening. We appreciate your time.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of the conference.
Hello, good afternoon. As mentioned, I'm Kristen Brown, VP of Government Relations here at SVLG, and I'm excited to introduce the next panel. In the last year, ESG has become a politically charged term, and for many, the context and reasoning behind considering environmental issues and social issues gets lost in the noise of the media and political landscape. So before introducing the next panel and turning the mic over to our moderator, I want to set the stage. Here are the facts. Sustainability is a strategic imperative for companies. It is what consumers and our communities expect, and is key for long-term success. In fact, studies are showing that a strong focus on ESG creates value in ways that are essential to business operation. In the short term, this looks like top-line growth, cost reduction, and productivity uplifts. Longer-term benefits include better returns on investment and more favorable regulatory environments. And aligned with the above framing and where we need to go as a state and a nation, we've put together a panel of experts to dive into the numbers versus the noise behind ESG investing. This conversation will touch on SEC regulations that will quantify the progress made, and also delve into the progress Silicon Valley has made and will continue to make on this important issue. Fahmida Bangert is Senior Director and Head of Sustainability and ESG at Intuitive Surgical. She has held sustainability and ESG roles at organizations like Stanford University and UC Berkeley. And at Intuitive, she oversees the ESG functions along with sustainability strategy, decarbonization, reporting, regulatory compliance, and environmental management systems. Joshua Parker is Senior Director and Assistant General Counsel at Western Digital. In his role, he leads the company's sustainability function and practices multiple areas of corporate law, including IP, mergers and acquisitions, and commercial contracts. Molly Wood is a longtime business journalist turned climate tech investor. Her company, Molly Wood Media, finds, introduces, and invests in solutions to the climate crisis. She is also the host of the podcast, Everybody in the Pool, a business-focused show about the climate economy. And she has previously served as the host of Marketplace Tech and co-host of This Week in Startups. Moderating the panel is Justin Femmer, partner at PwC. In his role, he is a leading partner in building governance and strategy on ESG and ESG-related technology roadmaps for PwC. He and his team support companies with compliance on government sustainability reporting proposals and other public transparency reporting, and we are excited to have him guide this discussion. Please join me in welcoming our panel to the stage.
All right, thanks everybody, good to be with you. We were all cringing back there because we didn't realize our bios were so long, and I think those were stripped off LinkedIn, or we would have shortened them. So really excited to have our panelists today who just got introduced. The title, kind of provocative, right? Numbers versus the noise. And we're gonna kind of get into a few different topics. So in my role at our company, we're helping a lot of companies think through now the reporting alongside their decarbonization roadmaps, et cetera. If I go back in time, a lot of companies started making, the pledge, right? Yeah, we're committed to 2050 net zero. The scientists are saying that's what we all need to say and do, and we did that. Over the last few years, we've seen a lot more scrutiny, around greenwashing, and fast forward even the last couple of years, we've got, CSRD, right, in Europe requiring a lot more disclosure. We've got SEC proposals, which I'm pretty sure are gonna be finalized in the next couple months, which is a totally different ballgame, right? Versus putting your sustainability information out voluntarily. You choose what you disclose. You kind of pick your own, estimates and methodologies. You don't have to do scope 3 if you don't want. You do that every 6 months in the summer. Now, it goes into financial statement integrity that you do the first few weeks of the year under audit, putting officers, basically liable like they are. If you remember kind of Enron, we had this whole new thing in financial reporting. Now we're putting our officers liable for what we're disclosing around ESG issues and numbers. So I can tell you, working with a lot of companies, this is kind of rapidly creating a little bit of, in some cases, controlled chaos. But I think if our goal is to move more companies or to create more accountability for achieving goals, like that's going to happen. And so I think it's really interesting. And as I say that, Josh, I'm gonna start with you. I've seen a couple companies recently, if you look at headlines, and I hope this doesn't happen too much, But as we now have more accountability for when we make a commitment, that we disclose more transparently how we're getting there, how we're progressing, what it's going to cost us. One set of companies maybe that doesn't have extremely or robust plans on there may be tempted to sort of back away, particularly with this extra scrutiny and transparency. I hope more companies don't do that, and we heard from a couple today that are certainly not. And Josh, even as of a couple days ago, right? This is fresh off the press. You guys have kind of continued to double down. You announced a recent goal of 100% renewable energy in your operations, diverting 95% of waste from landfills, reducing water withdrawals by 20%, and most importantly, your net zero emissions by 2032. Right? So the scientists said 2050. You guys are pushing it even further voluntarily. How do you guys decide to do this? I can't imagine this is just two people sitting in a room saying, let's just make a good PR statement, given everything I just talked about.
Yeah, it's a good point. It may look like odd timing for us to come out with our most ambitious sustainability commitments ever, and it is a little bit, but I think that's a reflection of the fact that our sustainability program, which is actually less than 5 years old at Western Digital, has from the very beginning been focused on making commitments that we are very, very confident we can achieve. And so data integrity has been a really foundational part of our approach, as well as focusing on materiality assessments and really trying to drive sustainability that is tied to long-term corporate value, and to make sure that when we make a commitment, we have a plan to get there. And we're lucky to have an executive team that understands sustainability, understands the value that it can bring to the company. And for example, our COO has created a sustainability team himself that helps run execution of these things. And they did a fantastic job wargaming, figuring out, okay, we want to be net zero. And from the beginning, companies, you want to set that ambition really high. You want to go all the way. You want to go to net zero as quickly as you can and make those other commitments. And some companies do that without having a plan. But I've been really impressed with our team, and we're a company full of engineers, so we're all about the planning and working things out, making sure all the math works. But we've developed some expertise that allowed us to say, yes, we have a plan, we have line of sight, we know how to get to this now. And so as soon as we had that line of sight, we were able to make the commitment. And it's going to take some investment, and that's challenging to do in uncertain economic times. But like I said, when you've got that executive commitment and you actually have the plan that allows you to get from A to B, it makes it happen.
I like a lot of what you said. In the uncertain economic times, right? And for a lot of, particularly in this sector, even when other sectors historically have, the oil, the energy sector, right? Remember when oil was -$1 or something, Silicon Valley was still generally booming. This is kind of the first time I'm seeing pressure, layoffs, publicly in some of our largest companies. And in the rooms where we're talking about climate investments and like what you guys have committed to, right, there is a cost associated with these things. And I think your point is really astute that the numbers do get reconciled, right? And this isn't just about doing good. This is doing the calculation of, again, sustainability, which is the name of this conference. Fahmida, we were talking backstage, and right now, again, the SEC disclosures rules are not final. A lot expect like scope 1 and 2 will be in there. So everything I said, what you've been putting out in your sustainability report now goes into the financial statement. And there's a lot, that means a lot of different things from a risk and otherwise perspective. You guys are also doing an inventory of scope 3 emissions. And if you guys had looked at, the California bill proposal, like scope 3 is included in there. Don't have inside baseball on kind of where that will land. That had been proposed before, didn't make it through. But this is coming up more and more, and we're seeing large companies commit to disclosing and managing their scope 3. So how have you guys chosen to do this, right? Again, it's not required necessarily today by any body. And for those of you that don't know, right, scope 3 is basically my entire supply chain. So things that some would say are indirectly in your influence, but not directly in your control, like your own buildings and your own operations and your people. So, why have you chosen to do scope 3? You've also, made commitments to recycle thousands of plastic. Maybe I'll ask you about that one later, and kind of, is that a bottom line or just a, let's do good? But let's focus on the scope 3 for a second.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. Good to see you. For those of you who don't know Intuitive, we are a pioneer in robotic-assisted surgery and minimally invasive care. Every 16 seconds, somebody's getting a Da Vinci surgery done. So to date, we've treated and healed 12 million patients in our 28 years of existence. For us, patient care is always at the center, and now we are looking at the planet as a patient and looking at the intersection of patient care and planet care. So, for us, a diagnosis is very important in order to come up with a treatment plan, and you can't really have a complete diagnosis unless you do scope 3. So scope 1 is all direct emissions, scope 2 is all the purchased electricity and gas, but scope 3 is really where the work is. Goods and services coming to the company, getting manufactured, and finished goods and services going out to the customers and ultimately to the patients. So for us, it was really important to take the full scan. And as expected, any company that manufactures goods and services, scope 3 is really the largest share, and for us too. So we wanted to take an honest and true approach, stick to the numbers, and really have a full diagnosis. And it's served us well so far because it builds conversations with parts of the company, particularly with our supply chain, in a much more meaningful and long-term way. So scope 3 sounds scary, but doing it can actually be very liberating for the operational and metrics-driven target for the company.
I think it's a great point. One of the things I've seen around scope 3 is, and if you look at the banking, know your customer laws, right? You can't just provide funding to, certain stakeholders in other countries without having some, understanding of who they are and potentially what the money's going to use. This is kind of gets into like know your supplier,
yeah,
right? I can't just turn a blind eye and say, hey, look, in my 4 walls, we're really, green, we're using renewable energy, yet I'm sourcing materials for my products in, places that either have a ton of emissions and or bad work conditions, et cetera. So I think what we're seeing is a lot more insight into the supply chain, like you talked about, being a large benefit beyond just wanting to measure, right? But the measurement can drive the better understanding. You also made a commitment around recycling thousands of pounds of plastic. Again, this is not required, but you guys set the goal. Now you'll presumably be held accountable to achieve it. Was this a bottom line calculation? Hey, if we recycle this plastic, it's going to save us this money. Was it we think this is going to be part of our story and brand that we want to promote? Some combination of all things?
Yeah, I wasn't there when some of those goals got set. I can only imagine, having met all the brilliant engineers and scientists in the company, that it had to be a combination of cost and efficiency. And plastics get talked about a lot, but again, focusing on the supply chain and where actually the embedded carbon and the purchased carbon is coming from. It's okay to start with a practice that maybe because of cost reasons, but for it to scale, you really have to do it for the betterment of the company, the continuity, and the finding efficiencies. So yes, we do recycle a lot of plastics. Also, our instruments have many lives, so they last as long as they can as part of the fantastic system it is. And we all know for ESG and sustainability, the decisions are on purpose, multi-criteria. It is good for the planet, it is good for the business or cost avoidance, and it somehow has to have an efficiency and growth factor for all those who build it together. So doing it for the cost is not necessarily a bad thing as long as they're combined with other criteria that bring E, S, and G together.
That's great. And I want to bring Molly into the conversation, sitting up here very patiently. Molly has kind of a unique perspective. So whereas you guys are in charge of significant decision-making around sustainability at your clients, I work with a lot of companies in the space. Molly, you were a tech journalist, podcaster, now have your own podcast, episode 4 coming out, I think soon, which is pretty cool, yesterday, and an investor. Right, and I think what we've always seen Silicon Valley, I mean, I moved here 8 years ago, one of the most exciting things is what Governor Newsom was talking about, right? Just the amount of innovation, the capitalism, the venture capital, and the capital allocation that happens. There's a major, if you look at a graph, uptick over the last 5 to 8 years in climate-related, companies, technologies, et cetera. What do you think about kind of the LP and VC market right now as it relates, and why is there so much interest and attention kind of in this space from a capital allocator perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And you make the good point that I was a journalist who moved into venture capital, and that was a very specific determination that this is fundamentally the biggest business story on the planet. It's also the biggest business opportunity on the planet. And, I don't want to be a mercenary about it, but it's a really good incentive system. It works. And that there will be innovations that we need in order to mitigate and adapt to global warming. And there will be innovations that companies need to adopt because they're not in a position to build them themselves. We have, without question, seen, and I think it's a result of a lot of different things, a huge influx into venture capital around the climate tech space. I think actually in 2022, even though you wouldn't have thought so, certainly in 2021, it was more money than crypto. So I'm taking that as a win. I don't know if it's going to be more money than AI this year or next, but it has been a huge, many tens of billions of dollars investment category for venture capital in particular. And I think it's probably because of a number of things. COVID was 100% a wake-up call. I can't tell you how many people I talked to who decided in the wake of COVID, because I think it was a sort of collective realization that the worst case can occur, that they wanted to move into something more meaningful with their lives and pivot to climate, maybe start a company in that space. You saw a lot of venture capitalists do the same thing, and frankly, the fires that we had were also a huge catalyst for people. When they woke up and the sun had not come up, which is the case on the Eastern Seaboard right now, a lot of people said, hey, I think this is probably kind of a big deal. And here, maybe I'm a VC who's already made all my money, and this is my opportunity to pivot into climate. And as a result, we have seen, billion-dollar funds be raised and a massive amount of investment kind of across stages of venture.
You mentioned AI. And so, just to bring in one other, big trend in Silicon Valley right now, and all you hear about, is there a, now we're prophesizing a little bit, but is there a role for, generative AI, maybe specifically in this? Because I tell you, some of the companies I've been talking about are thinking about decarbonization roadmap, right? There's hundreds of projects they could undertake in literally hundreds of locations, and what's the most financially optimal way to get there? It's hard math and analysis, and do you see these joint opportunities or these joint things coming together to help on the sustainability space?
It's a really interesting time, of course, around, in this entire conversation about generative AI and AI in general. Certainly, climate, you just talked about, Josh, it's a data challenge, without question. It's a prediction challenge, it's a kind of modeling challenge, and all of those things can be assisted by AI. And I hear plenty of entrepreneurs talk about how it'll be a great way to maximize energy distribution. For example, we know that intermittent availability is a big part of solar and wind energy, and mapping peak usage and electricity is something that everybody wants to outsource to the machines, and there's unquestionably opportunity there. The availability of a lot of compute power is, for example, an opportunity to come up with new materials design, maybe think about new battery chemistries, or be able to model them really efficiently. Although I have to say, a lot of the VCs I know think that quantum will be better than that for AI. All of that has to be balanced against the fact that it consumes a ton of energy. It really does. And that as we create more and more and more inexpensive electrons on the planet with solar and wind, we consume them almost as fast with new technologies and with data centers. And listen, I know some great companies who are working on super innovative chip design and increasing the surface availability of an individual piece of microelectronics almost infinitely with lasers, so that you can air cool it instead of water cool it. There will be technologies that develop in parallel to make some of that computing less energy intensive, but make no mistake, it's not as bad as Bitcoin, but it's a burner.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's hard to balance all these different things. One of the other pressures, and kind of bringing everyone back in, there's a lot more politicization, or there's a lot more politics around ESG, right, and sustainability, right? You've got governments in certain states, mandating that, their pension assets cannot be invested in something that has an ESG or sustainable tag, right? Kind of their justification is, we want to make investments based on what is likely to drive the highest ROI, and we don't want to limit that to certain qualifications. And you can see a lot on both sides out. It's really heated. I think what I'm seeing now on the pro, let's actually fix climate, pro ESG side, if you will, is getting a little bit sharper in terms of how we talk about it, right? And maybe not just merging all these issues together. There's a ton under ESG, right? We had the acronym created a long time ago, and for better or worse, these issues kind of can get conflated. What do you think, Fahmida? Because I know we talked about this in terms of, do we need to be sharper as we continue to articulate, hey, when I say, instead of just saying ESG issues, I'm talking about climate, right? I'm talking about diversity and inclusion, and this is our strategy on that. I mean, are we better off starting to get more specific on issues? And Josh, you mentioned material ad assessment. To me, that's what that means. It's like not every issue is equally important to my company or what we can impact. And is there something we need to do to just continue to sharpen how we talk about these things so that we can stop maybe tripping all this backlash from people or groups?
Well, finding common language for all audiences is always sort of the challenge. If we strip away the terms, the core values are actually the same in many cases. A good consulting firm once gave us a nice slide where we looked at, in the 70s, it started with license to operate. Mid-80s, do no harm, corporate social responsibility. Around 2000, consumers came in, they started caring. Investors came in, they started caring. Institutional investors said, well, we want to invest in companies that care about these things. So titles, sustainability, ESG, corporate social responsibility, they seem to be more fluid, but the core concepts about responsible growth, caring for others while we are growing our business and growing the economy and doing so responsibly by the planet, those are eternal, they're evergreen concepts. So yes, depending on the audience, we might want to address specific issues, but it's really good not to get hung up on the term E, S, and G. These are umbrella terms that bring a lot of concepts together. If we focus on actually what's getting done, how much carbon are we actually reducing, how many people are we actually helping, how much access are we actually creating, those common metrics matter a lot more. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the true trend.
So we have some questions from the audience. I love how real time this is. Just got handed cue cards. So maybe
then can we all jump in on that? Yes, the politics question.
Oh yeah, why don't you? Let's take it, please. Molly, go ahead.
I just want to piggyback on what you're saying in terms of sort of how to frame this, because it has been framed as a social issue when in fact it's a capitalism issue, right? Like if you do more sustainable business, you're probably saving money. You're more efficient. And you don't pollute, and a lot of good things that almost everybody cares about. If you have a diverse workforce, you are likely to create products that appeal to more people, which is good business because you will sell to more people. If you have a company that operates with ethical guidelines and good governance, you are less likely to go to jail and get shut down. So I sort of feel like a big part of addressing this controversy, which is real, and having billions of dollars worth of impact, and you're seeing pension funds actually sue in response and saying, if you want me to do my fiduciary duty to my clients, you cannot prevent me from investing in a way that I actually think is more responsible, and you cannot force me to invest in a class that is long-term an asset class in decline. Like if you look at fossil fuel investments, which by the way are currently funded, at least almost up to a third of that funding is coming from retirement plans and pensions, where people don't really know that they're invested in them and they don't have another choice. Yeah. And that is an asset class that over the long term is in decline and has a lot of volatility. And so I would just say, if you want to address the politics of it, use the capitalism.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I think that's so spot on. And
Thanks. Just take that and run with it. Just go.
I think that's so spot on. Like, I think the best defense is turning this into, it is positive ROI. This is about our business. That's why I love the term sustainability, right? Because it refers to the ongoing operations of the company, future cash flows, and all those sorts of things. Yeah.
Justin, if I could jump in as well. On the controversy piece in particular, I think that part of the problem that we have is that there are a million bad ways to do sustainability, and probably a smaller number of ways to do it well. And some companies and institutions and people just are so passionate about it, they go out and do something without a plan. And so if you tie yourselves to the data, tie yourselves to your materiality assessment, really look at the long-term sustainability in that true sense of your organization, whatever it is, then it lines up in the long term with these incentives. It is possible to spend a bunch of money on a sustainability initiative that has minimal impact on the world, on the climate, on your business. And so you have to be very selective about that. And I think one of the problems that we have is making sure that we are branding ourselves in that very responsible sustainability way. And then also going back to the data integrity, making sure that when we're making a commitment, it's a true commitment. And not only is it tied to our business and there's a strategy behind it, rather than just saying something because I personally feel like this is my mission, but also making sure that you've got the data to back it up and that you know what you're going to do, you know why you're going to do it, and you can make that case to people so that they understand the thought behind this, because a lot of us are putting tons of thought into this, and it's a huge effort, but you can make the case for it if you sit down and you're very strategic about it.
So Josh, I'm going to build on what you said and tie in, the audience participation. So we've made these goals. We've got the data. We're committed to them. We think we can achieve them. How do you compete for limited resources, right, in this space? And I'll maybe translate that in how do you prioritize those? I'll translate that as there's limited company resources, right? In recessionary times, there's limited, great sustainability practitioners, that you can hire in. So just maybe thinking limited resources all over the board, yet you've got these really ambitious commitments that require a lot of operational alignment of the company. So how do you activate that?
So talking about internal resources, I think I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but going back to the data and making that case, showing the strategy, showing the long-term plan, will allow the executives to prioritize it in a way that's methodical, that's thoughtful, and appropriate for the business. If you look outside of that, as far as resources for talent or even things like renewable energy, so we have manufacturing locations throughout Asia primarily, and it's not like the United States where if you want a PPA or renewable energy, it's always available there for you. There are infrastructure challenges, regulatory challenges, but both from a talent perspective and the kind of constrained environmental, renewable energy and so forth resources, that's a sustainable growth problem, what we're talking about today. We need growth there. And the market pressures that we're creating now by making credible commitments to sustainability, signaling to the market that this is where our company is going to create that demand, and then recruiting people. So many employees want to participate in sustainability. When we created our function, people just came out of the woodwork wanting to volunteer their time to participate in it because they're personally driven to do this. And people have transitioned their career, myself included, to one that focuses on sustainability because of the growing need. So as we continue to talk about it in a responsible, credible, positive way, people come in, resources come in, and you have that sustainable growth that we're talking about.
I love that. And that kind of, your story there is building off Molly's point. I mean, if you think about all the money that companies in the Valley spent on having pool tables and cool offices, right? It's to attract employees, right? This is a way to attract employees. There's clearly a business benefit. It's kind of the carrot and the stick. Hey, our customers will be coming, right? So maybe it's more revenues. Hey, in the future, there's more taxation. Maybe we minimize that by minimizing our carbon today. We get loans at lower rates. I mean, I think if you really put together this P&L approach in terms of all these decisions, it can be a financial, business case. And then obviously there's the incremental benefit of, solving a problem that I think many people believe need to be solved. So we have another question. I think this is good. Anyone could field this. So when it comes to creating internal alignment, and I'll send them an internal alignment towards achieving the goals, and buy-in for the ESG metrics, how do you incentivize C-suite and the company to follow suit And then they kind of go on to say, is it about tying like salaries to metrics, or presumably like bonuses to metrics?
I can take a stab at it. So, the metrics, if you're talking about the Global Reporting Initiative metrics or SASB metrics or others, they're typically standards and they're chosen for a specific industry. There's that initial work of trying to line up what are our company metrics and what are these metrics. Then comes the second phase where you say, actually, they are more or less the same, except this one is divided by gross square footage, or it's asking about intensity as opposed to just the raw number. That translation is the sustainability, ESG, and social responsibility group's job. There's definitely a translational element, but then comes the education and reassurance. In my 20 years of sustainability career, there's never been a barrier greater than just not knowing what the other person's talking about. So taking the time and doing that translation to showcase that actually your operational efficiency is more or less the same as the metric that would also count for an ESG metric, and rightfully so. So education creates alignment, and business case, first education, then business case, that creates alignment. And then I'm going to coin what you said, Josh, no random acts of greenness, right? Strategically streamline them and show that this is where, because ultimately ESG is a growth strategy for the company, responsible growth strategy. We know our metrics, they're aligned with what we're also trying to do operationally for the company, keep the margins, in check. And then if we do a few of these really good things together, we get to that proverbial point C, so to speak. So education is very important for alignment. Of course, you have to kind of find some early champions, but it's super important not to alienate any group from the start just because they may or may not be believers of ESG. Again, strip away the terminology. In its core, what ESG is about is actually what every good employee in the company is striving towards. They're just looking at it a little differently. So maybe I'm too idealistic, but it comes with conversation, persistence, business case, and a really good strategy towards bringing the collective together. And the last thing I would say is turn ESG into a decision criteria. It is a multi-decision criteria, but it is one. If everybody in the company, especially the C-suite, apply that criteria in addition to bottom line and employee retention, they will naturally arrive at a very long-term sustainable growth.
That's great. Before we get to final word from each of the panelists, any other just audience questions? You wanted to?
You can hit us up after too.
Yeah, you can hit them up after. Maybe they've all been written on these cards. So. Really interesting discussion. The regulations are coming, the more disclosures coming. You guys are all doing things in different ways. Molly, through your investments, and for each of you representing really large companies, setting trends for hopefully many other companies to follow suit. Maybe in your final 30 to 45 seconds each, either one of the biggest hurdles that we still need to overcome as either individuals or as a group or society to kind of move the needle in this space.
Well, so I'll jump in because I think this piggybacks a little bit on what you were just saying, which is that I think the other part of my business, in addition to investing, is storytelling. And fundamentally, I think this is a really big narrative. Just when I left journalism for investing, I realized that there was a huge storytelling challenge around climate, whether it's these companies translating what it is they're going to do if they're a really hard tech company, or selling this vision to multiple stakeholders, putting things in terms that people can understand, and helping companies tell that sustainability story to those stakeholders in a way that makes sense and is palatable and helps them understand it a little bit better internally. I think that is a much bigger deal than I had even realized, which is why it's called Mollywood Media, and they're still publishing a newsletter and consulting and advising around that, because I think every conversation like this makes me realize that there's still really a hill to climb, I think, in terms of people's understanding and awareness of how this all could work and does work.
I'll just say that I think this is a really exciting time to be in sustainability, despite kind of the growing pains that we've had over the past decade or so in trying to figure out what sustainability ought to look like, what ESG ought to look like. We're making very rapid progress. So Western Digital is a 50-year-old tech company, and it's only in the past less than 5 years, like I said, that we've really leaned into sustainability and tried to figure it out. And I know it's the same story for a lot of our peers, that now is the time where we're really focusing our efforts. And it's a confluence of events that has led to some very positive changes at the company. Our customers, our shareholders, our employees, they're all asking us to do things that are very well aligned with our materiality assessments. They're asking us to do things that feel good to do, that are good for the company, good for the planet, good for our communities. And so, and you add on that the regulations that are coming and so forth. There's a lot of positive pressure that's creating interest in sustainability and creating opportunity for us to make very significant commitments. I can't imagine our company committing to net zero 5 years ago. That was, of course, what we wanted to do. But the fact that we were able to do it so quickly, I think, is a testament to the unique environment that we're in. And it's a very exciting place to be in for those of us who are really committed to planet and people.
Storytelling, I will stay with that. It's when ESG is seen as a separate thing that a company has to do, it becomes very cumbersome. Oh, another thing we have to do. One of the fastest way to gain consensus and alignment is to find what does our company or our product already do that might be in alignment with ESG. So sometimes it's a very quick find if the company is creating products for people and the planet. Sometimes it takes a while. In our case, when we looked into minimally invasive care and our patients go home, heal faster and go home early, the resources and the carbon that they're saving by not staying in the hospital the extra 2 days and returning to doing what they love with their families, that gave us a story of carbon avoidance, which then goes in terms of what we do today is avoiding certain things. But yes, we also have a bag of carbon and responsibility. Let's now decarbonize them step by step. It creates a certain inspiration that is no longer a bother, but rather, okay, let's do this together because we can solve this. So I think finding a storyline that's authentic to your work's day-to-day connection with your organization could be a great point of alignment and further progress. It's kind of like you catch the East Asia current. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, panelists. You guys are great. Thank you, audience. You can come talk to any of us after this, and we appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Well, that was a great morning session, and I hope you all are able to enjoy lunch. We have a great set of speakers for this afternoon. So next up, the Silicon Valley Leadership Group CEO Ahmad Thomas will be staying on stage for the next two discussions. But it is my honor to introduce the next speaker, U.S. Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm, who is leading the Department of Energy's work to advance the nation's clean energy technologies that will help America achieve its goal of zero carbon emissions by 2050. Please welcome the Secretary.
Thank you. Great. Thank you so much. Welcome, Secretary Granholm. And I got to say at the top, you are a Cal grad. You went to high school down the street in San Carlos. I hope we're showing you love when you come back to California.
I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to getting a box lunch when I leave.
Very good. Well, I will jump right to it. We've got about 20 minutes with the Secretary and some time for Q&A. This is Silicon Valley. There's no writing questions on a card, so get your questions in on your app, and I'll make sure to get to as many of them as we can. But first, funding and investment. I want to talk about investment, innovation, and implementation. So you have a once-in-a-generation, truly a pivotal moment with the Inflation Reduction Act, with the bipartisan infrastructure law, to invest in clean energy technologies. How's that going? Can you give us some updates around
I'm
that?
sure you all are seeing what's happening across the country. It's amazing that policy actually works. What these bills, and I would include the troika of bills, right? I would include the CHIPS Act in there, right. The Invest in America agenda, we're calling it. It's just unleashed this wave of investment across the nation. So if you just look at, in my column of the world, just look at the battery space. 106, now of course we all know that the components in batteries often have been made in Asia. We want to be competitive. Since these bills have been passed, 160 battery companies have announced they're coming or expanding in the United States. And when I say battery companies, I'm talking about the full supply chain, anode, cathode, separator material, electrolyte, as well as extraction processing. That whole supply chain, soup to nuts, is over $100 billion have been announced and are being invested across the country. 51 now again, we know solar panels. China had a strategic plan to be able to, have corner the market in solar panel manufacturing. Because of the passage of these bills and the incentives for manufacturing and siting, 51 and counting since these laws were passed have announced they're coming and expanding. I mean, it is just astonishing to see this wave of investment happening across the country and happening in places that have been left behind, honestly. Right. It's super exciting. Let me just give you one example. Yeah. 2 weeks ago, I was in Weirton, West Virginia. Weirton is a former steel town. And when the steel industry was brought to its knees because of dumping and globalization and competition, the steel factory in Weirton, which employed thousands of people, shut down. 2 weeks ago, I was there, and on the place where they forged steel, we were groundbreaking for an iron air battery company, utility scale battery company. The whole community was there. The mayor, the city council. Talked to this one city council guy named Tim Connell, and he said, my grandfather worked at that steel mill. My father worked at that steel mill. I worked at that steel mill. I wanted my kids to work at that steel mill, but the plant closed. My kids moved away. They've lost a third of the population in that town because it was basically a one-company town. And now we gave them, through this policy, the gift of rebirth, really, a phoenix rising from the ashes. And that story is happening kind of in pockets all across the country.
Well, that's worth a round of applause.
Right? It's so great.
Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for that transformative change that you're driving via these investments. A bit of a parochial question, maybe place-based to Silicon Valley. Where do you see, you've got tech and innovation leaders spread throughout this audience, where are the opportunities for our Silicon Valley companies and the executives here connected to these investments, in your view?
Well, as you can imagine, a lot of these companies across the nation were born here, right? The ideas were born here. I think, this is something that I have long said. I was governor of Michigan too, and we used to compete against California and Texas and other places for manufacturing. Sure. I mean, you used to be the Silicon Valley manufacturing group,
true.
Right?
Yeah.
But that's gone. And I think California needs to do a better job of, honestly, and who am I? I'm just the Secretary of Energy, but I was a governor, and I know
the Secretary of Energy.
No, but I'm just saying, you're competing against these states that are all in on luring these here. They've got state economic development agencies that are sort of layering on top of what the federal tax credits are to make them irresistible. They have done permitting reform on the state level. We got to do it on the federal level, and I know this is a question that's happening on the state level. They're making the case. So all of that is to say, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, because obviously so many of these great ideas were born here, and the question is, how do you keep them here? And we're agnostic as to where these investments go. Obviously, these are private sector decisions about where they go, but they are going to go to places where they feel like they've got a better edge. And while nobody can compete with California's brains and weather, although you are starting to get pushback on that too, because of these extreme weather events and the pulling out of State Farm and insurance costs and all of that. But whatever you can do to help bring the costs down to make yourselves competitive and to speed things up, I think would go a long way to making more manufacturing come to this area.
Well, it's well said. It certainly resonates with our audience, and we're grateful to the governor for his remarks that he had shared via video at the top. I think being able to compete with those other states, given our high cost to live and operate here, it's very real, those incentives.
Totally, and I'm sure, I don't know if any of you have had governors come to your companies and say, why would you stay in California? It's so expensive, blah, 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 blah. You come to my city. I did it. When I was governor of Michigan, I would come here, try to get companies to come to Michigan. We'd give you zero taxes, come on. And you're competing against that all across the nation.
Right.
So anyway.
Right. Well, on innovation, what is exciting you most when you look at where your investments are going, when you look at future technologies?
Yeah, we've launched a series of energy Earthshots, we call them, on next generation technology, but especially to bring down the cost of technology. So for example, one of the Earthshots that I love is on enhanced geothermal. What keeps me up at night is having clean, dispatchable baseload power, right? Mm-hmm. And we want to make sure that renewables are as baseload-like when you add storage, but there are also solutions like geothermal, and with advances in fracking technology, you can go down, and the same skill set that the oil and gas industry uses for subsurface extraction of oil can be used for subsurface extraction of heat. And so the heat beneath our feet, to me, especially the enhanced geothermal, where they have new drilling techniques to be able to almost go, not anywhere, but close to deeper bore wells than you would otherwise have been able to do. That's very exciting to me. We have got a series of Earthshots. One is on clean hydrogen. We want hydrogen to cost $1 for 1 kilogram within 1 decade. When I say clean, I'm talking about next to zero carbon emitting. So electrolyzer-based hydrogen is really the gold standard.
Within a decade.
Within a decade, yes. We want floating offshore wind platforms. This is another Earthshot. Bring down the cost to $45 per megawatt hour by 2035. We have a series of shots like that that are very exciting to me. One thing that's really exciting to me, though, which is, the president has a decadal vision for fusion. And so nuclear fusion, of course, where you're fusing atoms together, which creates energy that does not create waste, unlike fission, where you're splitting atoms or atomic particles. That, to me, is very exciting. And of course, if any of you follow this at all, but at Lawrence Livermore National Lab.
We should have Livermore folks here.
We have Livermore folks here?
We should. Right
all
there
right.
in the back.
Wait, from the lab?
A shout out to the lab.
Or people who are working in Livermore.
Can they explain that fusion process to us?
The fusion caucus in the room. We achieved something that had been tried for 6 decades. They'd tried to, it's hard. Fusion is really hard to do this, but they achieved it on a very large, with huge user tool. The lab has 192 lasers that it points at a little target, but it proved that it's possible. And so now abundant energy from fusion is not just a question of whether, but when. And that's very exciting to me as well.
Well, you think of a moonshot or an Earthshot. Is that aspirational, or is it realistic?
No, we're very, we have 17 national laboratories. We are a science-based organization at the Department of Energy. So when we are doing roadmaps for Earthshots, we are not intending to defy, physics.
Sure.
We believe that this can happen. And so We are putting a lot of, in order to get to those steps, we fund next steps to break down the barriers. We've identified what those are and aligned our funding opportunities to make sure that we hit those targets.
Well, touching on investment, innovation, I want to speak to implementation before we open it up for questions. Now, in California, and I know you're well aware of this, we have CEQA, which of course is well intended, but has really been misused, where we have projects that aren't able to come online for years, which actually has a negative climate impact, I believe, because these are clean projects sometimes that are delayed. And I guess I would ask you just the high-level question: where does streamlining permitting at the state level, where does that fit into these plans? If you have great investments and can't actually get something built, that's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a problem when you consider the viability of a project, right? I mean, so for example, we are rolling out all the time funding opportunity announcements under the bipartisan infrastructure law. One of the funding opportunities that's coming up, we did a first round of battery selections, and we'll have a second round coming up of billions of dollars of opportunity. The people who evaluate these are merit-reviewed panels. It's very, they first review the technical capability, right? And they also review how commercially viable is this? Is there a strategy to make sure that there's offtake, that there's a workforce strategy, that there's a community benefits plan? But the viability of a project and can you get it out the door is important. So, but I say this on, you know, California's got an issue. The federal government has an issue on permitting too. Obviously, we've been talking about that on the, you know, in Washington. The debt ceiling deal had some changes. One of them I think was helpful, which is it has a shot clock now on being able to get environmental assessments and environmental impact statements done. Great, because that provides certainty. But there's still a lot more to do. We have to add, I mean, just as an example, we've got to, as a nation, basically triple the size of our electric grid if we're going to put all the renewable energy on it needed to get to the goal of 100% clean electricity by 2035. We have to add 2,000 gigawatts of clean energy to our nation's electric grid. We need a transmission grid that can do that. We need permitting that can get that transmission grid up. You know, and these environmental laws, fantastic intentions, and nobody wants to denigrate protecting the environment. But Bill McKibben had a great article recently, and he's a very strong environmentalist, right? Environmental activist, and he has come to the conclusion that delay on these projects is a form of climate denial.
Oh, interesting.
That a lot of environmental activists have used these laws to protect, of course, the environment and used it for the purposes of delay. But now, we know what has to happen. I mean, you just have to look at these wildfires in Canada. I mean, they're experiencing what we experienced here a couple of years ago, right? This Mars-like experience with the smoke turning the air orange. It's everywhere. We spent $165 billion as a nation last year just cleaning up after these extreme weather events. It is on our doorstep. So we can no longer, the very environmental area or species that we are seeking to protect with these laws are going to be damaged by climate change if we do not act with alacrity. So, bottom line is, I think every state, including California and the federal government, have to get our act together to realize you will protect the environment if you act on climate.
That deserves a round of applause. Yeah. We so deeply appreciate that here. If you take one example of where public-private partnerships and your leadership has been so successful, Applied Materials, and a shout out to Applied Materials. We had the vice president here a couple weeks ago, right, with a $4 billion investment in the R&D center that's coming from CHIPS, or partly leveraged by CHIPS funding. If you cannot move forward quickly to get that project built because it's tied up in these permitting fights, it has ramifications that go well beyond just our regional economic impact when we look at chip supply for the country. And so what our governor is proposing includes those CHIPS projects, as part of this streamlining.
That's great.
So we appreciate what you shared, and also how I think direct you were about that, because that's a significant issue for us. I want to touch on equity quickly before we turn to audience questions. And to audience members, we will be turning to your questions next. But the equity action plan, maybe just at a higher level, I think the focus of the Biden administration, your focus on equity, it is important. And in the time that we're in right now, trying to build a more equitable society, our companies across this room focused on DEI, it's very meaningful to us. So I would appreciate any reflections you might be able to share about your commitment. And again, thank you for all of your work in supporting equitable policies.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the first executive order that the president signed is this Justice 40 executive order, which is that 40% of the benefits of all of these investments should go to communities that have been left behind, that we need to right some wrongs. And so how does that look inside of these funding opportunities, for example? So at the Department of Energy, as one example, we evaluate proposals that come in if based upon the merit, like I described, and their viability, but also whether they have a community benefits plan. In fact, 20% of the score of how we evaluate is the community at the table, and is there a meaningful community benefits plan? Nothing to the community without the community. Nothing should happen to the community without the community. And so, so many of the tax credits and the adders in the laws are to try to embed structural equity when we've had structural inequality. And so just as one example, which is just astonishing, if you want to do a solar project, for example, a distributed solar project, rooftop solar, and you decide that you want to go to a low or moderate income area, a disadvantaged community, and put your solar panels on homes that are for low and moderate income people. You get your 30% tax credit off the top. You get another 20% if it involves low income housing. You get another 10% for going to a disadvantaged community. So now that's 60%. You get another 10% for domestic content. You can get a 70% tax credit by choosing to locate this project in a disadvantaged community. That is a specific effort to lure and to make irresistible investments in communities where people have not invested in the past. And that makes me very proud.
Well, it is. It's certainly deeply needed, and I think that's a good segue. One of the audience questions is about funding, and it says, most federal funding goes to big cities and now rural disadvantaged ones. But many of us are in small, suburban, under-resourced communities hammered by big transportation like SFO. Maybe someone in San Mateo County asking this. What can be done for middle cut-through communities? As a governor, I'm sure you appreciate the question.
Yeah, I mean, I encourage any community who may be represented here to make sure you go to, I'll say the DOE website, but this is true for the, if there's an agricultural interest, and it may be an agricultural and rural community, it may be a community that has a port or is bisected by a big piece of infrastructure. Every one of the departments, whether it's Department of Agriculture, Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, or the EPA, we have all got significant funds now to try to repair the damage caused by previous decisions. And so, and we also, depending on the size of the community, especially this is true for tribal communities, we offer significant technical assistance as well to be able to help communities be able to apply. And a lot of us, it's true in the Department of Energy, we're revamping a lot of our programming, especially as it relates to small and rural and disadvantaged communities, to make the application process much more simple. Now, that is not true in the larger programs. Those are still pretty complicated. If you went to the Loan Programs Office, I don't know if Jigar Shah has spoken to this entity, but I'm sure a number of you know him. He runs our Loan Programs Office. He's got $400 billion to be able to invest in projects that fill in the supply chain gaps and that really will continue to drive incredible change in terms of manufacturing. But their process is rightfully rigorous because they want these projects to succeed and they want to be a partner in making sure it succeeds. So we've got involved processes for bigger projects, and we have all of us projects or funding opportunities for communities that have been damaged by prior, policy decisions. And so I encourage you to check out our websites.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We have an ESG question. There's a little bit of color here, which I'll skip and get to the question. I will say ESG is becoming this four-letter word. It's not a four-letter word to Silicon Valley and to the companies that you see here. But the question is, where do you see the biggest challenges and opportunities for public-private sector partnership around ESG, climate and clean energy?
I do think, to your point about ESG being, I'll just say being politicized, honestly, and it's really so crazy. However, I will say this, that all of our stuff we consider to be private sector-led, government-enabled. And for us, making sure that that a business that we're funding has got goals that are consistent with the goals of the nation is really important. And it's also important, we were just saying backstage, ESG is also important for recruitment purposes. Sure. You want to retain young people. They want to be part of a company with a mission and with a vision and with, a responsibility to community and to the planet. So I feel like this is this pushback on things like ESG or Disney, whatever, is kind of a thing of the moment. But honestly, if you're not considering your sustainability practices, if you're not, then it's an anti-bottom line decision. I mean, you have to be able to do that to be able to, to have a return and to be responsive to your board, your investors, et cetera. So I feel like this too shall pass because it seems so anti-business, anti-science, anti-planet.
I hope so. I hope so.
Knock on wood.
Well, I'd love to give you the floor here to close. And again, Secretary, thank you so much for coming out here, for sharing your perspective with us. We're grateful for your tremendous leadership. What would you leave us with to inspire the climate change leaders in this room, what you're optimistic about as you close?
I'm so bullish on what is happening right now. I feel like our team at the Department of Energy, we just pinch ourselves every day because we feel like, oh my God, what a time to be in this space. And you in the private sector who are in this, clean energy space, I hope you feel it too. We have never had the resources that we have right now. We have never had the momentum that we have right now. The United States has become the irresistible nation to invest in if you are a clean energy business. And if you look just at the data coming out of deployment, this morning, Wood Mackenzie was saying that our investments in deployment of solar in the first quarter was the highest it's ever been. The fact that Bloomberg New Energy Finance this morning said that they've revised their electric vehicle uptake numbers and that by 2026, 28% of new vehicles sold will be EVs. These data points just keep coming. And I don't know, this is so exciting of a time for the now, as well as for what we are going to do to bend the curve to heal our planet. And it's true, I'll just say this globally as well. Other nations are looking to what we have done and are seeking to either replicate or their businesses are seeking to move here. So we're really, this is an amazing time. Sometimes, when you're in the middle of a history-making moment, an inflection point, you don't know it because you're in the middle of it. But I think we'll look back and say, oh my God, this was a consequential moment where we really started to heal the planet. Thanks.
Wow, that is so powerful. Well, thank you very much.
You bet.
Thank you, Secretary.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate
Thanks, everybody.
it. Thank you.
Before I introduce our next speaker, SVLG has graciously offered me a few minutes to talk about sustainability at Western Digital. If I were in your shoes, however, I would be fighting a natural inclination to tune out anything that sounded like a laundry list of achievements, or worse yet, a sales pitch to fellow salespeople. What might pique my interest, on the other hand, would be some brief insight into why and how Western Digital has invested in sustainability, even in times of economic uncertainty, because I might find some examples that could apply to my company, or at least find some encouragement and a reminder that we are all in this together. So why do we invest in sustainability at Western Digital? Yes, it is personally satisfying. Yes, it feels like the right thing to do. And yes, it makes our PR team very happy. But the primary reason that we've been able to make sustainability a growing focus at our company is that we believe it will drive long-term corporate value. I do believe, as I discussed this morning, that the rumors of the death of ESG have been greatly exaggerated. There are, I think, truly a million wrong ways to run a sustainability program, and some companies have been finding those ways. But in the not-so-new reality we find ourselves in, a methodical, data-driven approach to sustainability reduces regulatory risks. It creates marketable product value. It attracts and retains employees, and it can even attract new investors. With those dynamics, even companies that are laser-focused on shareholder returns will find compelling reasons, like Western Digital has, to commit to net zero in our operations by 2032, and to run on 100% renewable energy and reduce our water withdrawals by 20% by 2030. But those commitments and the claims that follow them will tumble like a house of cards if not built on meticulous data integrity. As frightening as new regulation can be, it may curb the Wild West mentality that has led some to make claims and commitments that can't withstand scrutiny or time. So to any of you struggling to build consensus around sustainability, my advice is to live by your materiality assessments and to obsess about your data integrity. Those two foundational pillars have developed a deep-seated credibility that has completely reshaped sustainability at Western Digital, leading to progress and commitments that I wouldn't have thought possible even a few years ago. Doing right by the planet and our communities is certainly worth that effort. Now, I'd like to turn the stage over to a true pioneer in the nexus of innovation and environment. Michael Regan has served as the 16th Administrator of the United States Environmental Protection Agency since March 2021. He is the first black man and second person of color to lead the US EPA. Prior to his nomination as EPA Administrator, Administrator Regan served as the Secretary of the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, as an executive at the Environmental Defense Fund, and actually started his career at the EPA decades ago. Throughout his career, he has been guided by a belief in forming consensus, fostering an open dialogue rooted in respect for science and the law, and an understanding that environmental protection and economic prosperity go hand in hand. He'll be in conversation with SVLG CEO Ahmad Thomas, and I look forward to an enlightening hour of conversation. Please join me in welcoming Administrator Regan and Ahmad Thomas to the stage.
Thank you. It is great to see you, Administrator. I have to apologize for having to follow the Secretary. That is tough duty.
Oh,
so
gosh.
you've already stepped up with a very high bar, but we are thrilled to have you back in California and so truly honored that you join us here today.
Well, thank you for having me. I hate following Jennifer as well, but you know, I think if we could plug Jennifer into our grid, we'd have all the power we need.
We solve everything. So we're going to talk about innovation, we're going to talk about investment, and this nexus of economic impact. For those in the audience, we have about 45 minutes of Q&A here one-on-one, about 15 minutes for your questions. So get it in on the app, and I'll get to as many questions as we can. And I'll start with the same theme as the Secretary on investment. Right, you've got a $100 billion plus between Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law. Can you talk about where your priorities are around investment and deploying those funds?
Well, first of all, I have to say I'm thankful for President Biden's leadership, because at EPA, most people don't like to see us coming. The regulator isn't the most popular, but he's giving me some walking around money.
Sure.
100
Walking around money.
Walking around money.
Okay.
And it really does span our mission. 50 billion of that is focused on shoring up our crumbling water infrastructure and wastewater infrastructure, pulling out every single lead line in this country. Over 9 million people, families, are exposed to lead in their drinking water. $5 billion to electrify our yellow school buses. Think about it, the transportation that takes our most precious cargo to school. $5 billion, we want to electrify our yellow school buses. I'll tell you, I was in Alma, Kansas, not too long ago, population of less than 5,000 people. 9-year-old named Brant introduced me and talked about asthma and the importance of riding an electric school bus. But just as giddy was the Rural Electric Cooperative and the municipality, because while Brant's in school, they're going to plug that bus into the grid and smooth out that load, save their customers some money. $27 billion in a greenhouse gas reduction fund, where we can really think about how nonprofits and cities and the private sector can help us bring capital off the sidelines and invest in carbon reduction strategies. Something that's really near and dear to my heart, $3 billion, billion with a B, to focus on environmental justice and equity, really going to those communities that need these resources the most, these frontline communities, and they're going to compete for grants that will let them use local solutions to combat pollution and climate change. Those are the priorities, and they span public health, transportation, the power sector, climate change. It's a really, really rich time to be at EPA.
And a busy time for you, and your leadership is appreciated right now. And I'll double click on a few of those, but we'll start with the greenhouse gas reduction fund, the $27 billion. And maybe the question is at a high level when we're talking about leveraging public and private investment. Where are those opportunities for success? Can you speak to where you see, especially for our leaders in the room, the opportunities to leverage public investment with private spend?
It's $27 billion. It sounds like a lot of money until you really wrap your head around we're trying to solve an over $2 trillion problem.
Right.
So the public-private partnership piece is a necessity. 20 billion of that, really proud to say that we're going to design programs where we work with nonprofits, where we work with those who are more experienced in handling and investing resources, where we work with some of these cities who are on the front lines who've already been thinking about how to invest. We're going to create competitions and grants so that $20 billion can be invested in the most strategic places in the most strategic ways by people who are experts at handling capital. $7 billion, you're looking at rooftop solar for blue collar and average families all across this country so that they can participate in the clean energy revolution. And so, I think what I'm proud of is we're taking these resources and we're playing the appropriate role of government, which is we are setting the rules of the game, but we're setting those rules in a way that those who are embedded in investment and technology can play, innovate, and be entrepreneurial to make this money go as far as it should go.
When you talk to the president and leaders in Congress, I'm curious that leverage component, is that understood, the power that you have when you can take, I mentioned with the Secretary, the Applied Materials investment, $4 billion, which is leveraged with CHIPS funds and state funds. But I think that multiplier effect is significant. And I don't think we've seen the level of focus around the multiplier effect in public-private partnerships from previous administrations.
You haven't. This is historic. We're living in historic times. I think this is the wisdom of President Biden. When he ran for the presidency, he said that he'd be a president to every single person in this country, that he'd combat the climate crisis head on. But he was very, very clear about being bipartisan and focusing on the power of government and the private sector. All of this is coming to fruition, and I think the fun part about my job is the regulator typically doesn't participate in the grant and awards game. We are typically just setting the rules of engagement and then sort of backing off. We have the opportunity to set those rules of engagement up, leveraging technology and innovation and the like, and then putting our money where our mouths are as we design these programs to use this $27 billion. We're going to try to push that out to organizations that will align with those regulations so that we can combat the climate crisis, create jobs, and stay globally competitive. We want this country to remain in that globally competitive position. Right. And we believe that we can do that while we save our children and save the planet.
Well, on the topic of marginalized communities and equity, I want to make sure to double click on that, the Equity Action Plan. But maybe a personal question and then speaking to that. So you being in this role matters. You know, my uncle went to A&T, as we talked about. My mom was an RN. Dad, lifelong military, Vietnam vet, you know, very similar to you.
Yes.
But to see you, an HBCU grad, for my sons to see you in this role, it matters, right? And speaks to us. How does that hit you? You know, how do you manage through all of that? Maybe it's the personal question. And then the Equity Action Plan is obviously what you're implementing. I'd love you to speak to that, but I don't want to dismiss the personal component. Yeah. And again, I'm truly grateful for your leadership.
Well, thank you for that, and I'll tell you, it's humbling. There's not a day that I don't walk into the office and forget that. I'm very mindful of that, and I'm a person of faith, and I think that I'm blessed. God has provided me with this opportunity to do something that's bigger than just me. And so as I travel the country, I see how people from all walks of life look at me differently. And it's an honor.
Because of the role.
Because of the role. Because the first black man to lead the EPA, a lot of people would, you know, lead folks to believe that African Americans and minorities are not interested in the environment. They don't know or participate in the environment. And so people who occupy these positions that we occupy don't typically look like us. And I think it's a reflection of the advancement of this country that all people, irrespective of the color of your skin or how much money you have in your pocket, can really do any job that you put your mind to. And so I'm grateful for that. And what I try to do is inspire people as I travel the country by saying, if you work hard, you can achieve your goals, no matter what people are telling you. And they believe it because I look atypical. So there's that power in being able to do that. Whether it's for young girls or whether it's for African-American males, it doesn't really matter. You can really harness the difference because there is a difference in this situation. You know, in terms of environmental justice and equity, you know, leadership starts at the top. The president said from day one that every single thing he did would serve as a rising tide for all communities. He's the first president to talk about environmental justice, first sitting president to talk about environmental justice during the State of the Union address. So this is something that is very serious to him and is near and dear to my heart. And so I feel like I can run as fast as I can. We have reorganized our agency and created a national program with 200 people whose job solely is to focus on environmental justice and equity across the board. We have made EJ a part of EPA's DNA.
I like that.
And the staff love it. Yeah. They love it because they're there to protect the planet, but they love it because they know that they're doing it in a way that protects everyone. And so we're a small but mighty organization because of the culture, the beliefs, and what we're trying to do. And it's easier because we're serving a president that believes in it.
And do you believe that that belief system is changing, understanding how important it is to uplift all communities, understanding really the structural challenges environmentally that take decades to undo? You know, and you've only been in this role a brief period in that broader scheme of things.
I believe so. I think that whether I'm in Lowndes County, Alabama, predominantly black county, where you see a disproportionate impact in terms of a lack of water infrastructure, or whether I'm in McDowell County, West Virginia, the heart of Appalachia, where you see the exact same thing happening to a predominantly white community, because of their income status. As we have designed our environmental justice and equity programs, we've been very strategic to show whether you're Native American, Hispanic, white, or black, or Asian, any of our cultures, that there are folks who are having a tougher time, and that our environmental laws and investments should create a rising tide for every single person in this country. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to shape that. And I believe that if we reorganize, which we've done, and I believe if we infuse capital at a fast enough rate over these 4 years, it'll be very hard to dial that back. And more people in this country will be better off because of that.
That's well said. That's worth a round of applause. Yeah, we very much appreciate that. I want to ask one more question on equity and then pivot to innovation. You have jurisdiction over a wide array of different pollutants. Obviously you have communities of color that have been disproportionately impacted environmentally. Can you speak to, when you look at pollution reduction in some of your areas of focus, where you're seeing progress and opportunity?
I feel very thankful that I've come along in a time where there are technological solutions. And, I have been heartened in my conversations with the private sector around pollution control technologies and best management practices that may have not been available in the past. And having these tough conversations with the private sector from day one has helped me realize if we tweak the design of our regulations in a way that's more conducive to innovation, extending a little bit of trust, but on the back end having those verification processes, the private sector can meet the moment. And we're seeing that happen in the automobile transportation sector. We're even seeing that happen in the petrochemical sector as well. The technologies exist, the business models are there. Quite frankly, we just have to have the will to do right by all people. And I'll be honest with you, we at EPA have decided that we're going to use the power of the media and social media to shine a light on where this isn't happening. And I can guarantee you a lot of it does require action by EPA, but a lot of it is once that light shines on those who are not doing the right thing, somehow, some way, they find the resources to do the right thing. That's what we want them to do.
Right. Well, I think when you look around this room at the innovators, our leading companies, leading technology companies in the Valley, this is part of our ethos. I often talk about a new era of Silicon Valley leadership. Environmental stewardship is a core component of that. And when we talk about technology and the technology that's propelling us, I want to shift to EVs. And maybe we can double click on the school buses.
Yeah.
When you spoke about your experience and the young boy with asthma, can you speak to where you are focused connected to EV deployment and also share updates around the school buses?
Well, I think the reason I love telling the Alma, Kansas story is because we keep hearing from certain groups of people that EVs are not designed for our rural constituency, that EVs aren't designed for moderate to low income. And we know that as this technology evolves and as we design our regulations and as we infuse these tax credits and other things from this historic legislation, that electric vehicles will be available for people all over this country. And so my focus is on the technology, making sure that our regulations accurately capture the ability of these technologies, but doing it in a way where we pay constant attention to cost benefit. We pay constant attention to, if we push on our regulation, will the infrastructure be there? How do we match those things so that all people in this country have access to this new clean transportation economy? I think we try to, at EPA, this EPA, we try to ensure that all of our regulations and all of our policies move as quickly as possible, embracing technology and innovation and demonstrating that you can do good and financially do well at the same time, and you don't have to leave anyone behind. It's a work in progress,
right.
But we're seeing a lot of momentum here, and that goes for our power sector, That goes for our oil and gas sector. I just have some of the best conversations with innovators behind the scenes in some of these supposedly hard industries. And it's leaders like those in this room that are making these conversations easier to have. And I'm thankful for that.
You don't talk like a regulator, which I really like. And maybe on that question of innovation and technology, what are the technologies that are exciting you the most? You know, when you think about climate and where you see the most opportunity.
You know, I was at a CIRA conference in Houston not too long ago, and when you think about the oil and gas sector and you look at this AI technology, you look at these robotic dogs, you look at all of this technology that's going to sniff out these emissions and really help us, you know, look at the data more closely and maximize the reduction of methane in the oil and gas sector. Things like that get me excited. When I'm talking to a rural electric cooperative and they're excited about a yellow school bus because they know during the day it's going to be parked and their membership is going to benefit from a more efficient energy delivery. When I think about the power sector and all these clean technologies that are on the horizon, clean fuels, it's exciting. And you know, a lot of times we think that our farmers are not in the game. You know, the precision agriculture game is so hot right now.
Right.
And when you look at what can be done to more efficiently feed this country, but reduce the amount of pesticide and herbicide and runoff, it's amazing. And so as a regulator, I am very well aware of the power of a regulation. But if I can match that with the innovation and the brilliance from the people out here in this audience, it's a win-win all day long.
Right. I think that's so well put. Yeah. And I'm very curious listening to you, and I know your bio well, and I'm sure most of the audience do, but can you speak to where this spirit comes from, the spirit to be very focused on innovation and finding solutions that are business positive, yet also benefit all communities?
I think I'm just young enough, you know, the Nintendo, the Atari, you know, technology has always been of interest to me. And what's burned into my brain is the conversations I've had with my parents. And I remember when I first started working at EPA, I was visiting with my parents, and I had a cell phone, I had a BlackBerry. And my dad was saying, it's amazing that you're not in the office on that piece of machinery conducting business all across the country, when just a few years ago, you know, the Army had just given me a beeper.
Right.
And he talked about how powerful that was as a young EPA employee to have a piece of technology that could do work much differently than just 5, 10, 15 years ago. And so as I learned more about the agency, I quickly realized, especially in our air office, we call them regulations. I like to call them technology standards. If we really look at these standards, they are technology standards. They're supposed to endear innovation. They're supposed to create entrepreneurial opportunities. They're just supposed to give some guideposts on how to do it and make sure you protect public health. So if we really embody the true purpose of a water or air regulation, it really is to encourage the latest and greatest technologies, the best data, and make sure that they're equally protective of everyone in this country. I don't see another way to do this job if we don't embrace the private sector and technology. We don't get the job done, which is making sure that if your child has asthma, that they are exposed to the least amount of pollution so that they can go to school, they can learn and be positive, productive citizens in this country. That's really what it's all about.
So how can the technology executives, the leaders in this room, how can we add the most value for you in your role at EPA when you talk about advancing new frontier technologies? Where are the opportunities for partnership that are most valuable from your perspective as administrator?
I think we need to have more conversations. And I believe that I've tried to open up our agency to invite members into the agency and have conversations before we start designing regulations. If you look at...
not after the fact, trying to be proactive.
Not after the fact.
Right.
You know, we love to get your comments, but it's better to be on the design side of the equation. And so if the government could do a better job of having a two-way conversation and then having that bleed into the design of these regulations, the comment period should just be the smoothing over, and we should be coming out with products that are good for business and good for the environment. And so I just try to stay out and about as much as possible. You can't do this job from behind a seat in Washington, D.C. You have to be out, hear the thoughts and ideas of people, and then go back and impart that in the agency. That's the best thing. We have to just have a better relationship.
Well, on the lessons learned relationship, the regulatory standpoint, I'll pick one example, which are power plants, where I know it is a space with layers of challenges. I would love it if you could speak to that example around regulation and lessons learned, and obviously the work and focus connected to power plants.
I can say that when the president first appointed me, I started a conversation with the power sector. And it went something like, instead of dying by 1,000 paper cuts, why not partner with me and let's think about the most pressing regulations that have to come out in the next couple of years. Maybe we expedite some, and then I'll bundle them, they'll be individual, but we'll bundle the time frame. And then you will be able to assess the economic impact of these 4 or 5 regulations as opposed to guessing over a number of years. What we found out is whether it was a mercury air toxic standard or a 111 rule or something that dealt with effluent guidelines for wastewater, if we put all of these rules on a similar track and then solicited their input, they had an opportunity to help refine all of these rules and maximize the environmental co-benefits while looking at the economic impacts. So fast forward 2.5 years, we've rolled out 5 to 6 rules that I believe really do maximize the environmental opportunity in the power sector, but also has previewed to the power sector where their investments should go if they want to be profitable moving forward. And I think that is forcing the industry to not settle, but to really say, because of long-term investment opportunities, and we know directionally where all these regulations are going, we can make long-term investments. We can make smarter decisions. Mm-hmm. We can really take the plunge and invest in some of these technologies that we know will pay off 5, 6, 7 years down the road. It's about that predictability.
Right. I want to ask one additional question before turning to audience Q&A, because I want to double click on this tech and innovation, and it's maybe a messaging question for you. Put your PR hat on. What I want to ask is what we get wrong with our messaging, but I'll say it a little bit differently. Where do you see the opportunities for us, for our leaders in the room, to do a better job in communicating the positive social impact of our products? Because I think, unfortunately, we've run up against a techlash that is real. And I believe you talk about Nintendo and Atari, a lot of things we know and love and appreciate, and how technology has had such a positive influence on your life from a very young age. I think, unfortunately, a lot of that is being lost, that positivity connected to our work, which is genuinely good. In some parts of the country, it just isn't there. Yeah. And in some political factions, it's not there. It's very frustrating for me in my role leading SVLG, but I would love to hear your perspective around where you see opportunities for us to maybe be more effective in sharing the good that is connected to the technology sector.
I think, and I've had this conversation with my predecessor, Lisa Jackson, over at Apple.
Yeah, shout out to Lisa at Apple.
And I just left Kate Brandt over at Google. I think that talking about technology in a way that is accessible to everyone is the trick. I think that the opposition can make technology so foreign or inaccessible And that's just not true. And so as we think about the role of technology and all of the things that it can do, from efficiency to advantages around education to really helping us be better in the space of environmental justice, I think that there is a narrative around how you connect technology directly to social good and make sure that that socially good message is one that is strong. It's just downright disingenuous to say that our rural communities, because of a lack of broadband, hate technology. They yearn the broadband, but those same individuals that yearn that broadband are looking at $1 million tractors that are probably the most high-tech thing they've seen in a very long time. So dispelling these myths, the accessibility, the active demonstrations, those are the things that I think we all have to do. I'm the administrator of the EPA. Most people don't know who that is. Most people don't believe.
Most people don't know, so you walk down the street like nothing.
Unless there's a crisis. Then everybody knows you.
Well, that's not good. So you're recognized in a crisis. But all right, so you can just walk down the street and no one knows Michael Regan.
Well, in the beginning.
In North Carolina, you can't do that.
Now I am more recognizable.
Okay.
But I think that is because, in all honesty, we've tackled tough problems like the water crisis in Jackson, Mississippi.
Right.
Or the train derailment in East Palestine. I think the president has done some really good things on EJ and the Rose Garden. So the EPA administrator's role has been elevated, but we still have a lot of our population that's just agnostic to how government works. And
so not environmentally agnostic, but just politically policy agnostic.
Yeah, when you tell most people the government is here to help, they don't believe that. So I think we have the same problem. How do I, as the administrator, really sell what we're doing to average people? My uncle is in his second career, and he drives a yellow school bus. And I just sat down with him, truthfully, 3 weeks ago. He had no idea that my agency had $5 billion to electrify yellow school buses all across the country. So we have to keep getting after having the right conversations with the right people. I think it's something that plagues all of us.
Well, we've got the right person here, and hopefully this is the right conversation. And
yes,
we're grateful for that. I'll turn to some Q&A to make sure our audience questions are included here. The first question from the audience, what is EPA's role in making sure there's a level playing field nationally so that we can see growth across the country like here in California? Maybe this is talking about we're fortunate we have a governor who's very forward-looking when it comes to climate, trying to find a level playing field around maybe it's a regulatory question, I'm not sure.
Let me see if I can, I'll take a stab at that, and I'll say, since you've started that piece, that the governor in California is very progressive around automobiles. And obviously California has the ability through a waiver structure to go further than anyone else. I think my responsibility is to take a look at why California can do what it's doing and try to be as aggressive on a national basis, but also understand that every state, North Dakota, New Mexico, South Carolina, may not have the same infrastructure, the same economics, the same accessibility. And so what we try to do is we try to be as progressive as possible on a nationwide level so that GM feels just as comfortable in California as it does in South Carolina. So we try to keep pace, but there is nothing wrong with respecting the autonomy that states have to be even more entrepreneurial.
And North Carolina progressive looks a little different than California progressive.
Absolutely. Wait a minute. California progressive looks different than every other state. How about that?
All right. So Interesting question here. And you know, we have an audience that you have such great talent in this room. We love this feedback. So the question, environmental issues have fallen into silos. Environmental groups have fallen into silos. Each focus on solving just a specific problem. But how can we take a more holistic approach?
That's a very good question. And in my small, tiny piece, what I've done is, thanks to my Deputy Chief of Staff of Outreach and Strategy and Engagement, we bring the big CEOs in every couple of months, force them to sit at the same table and have a holistic conversation with the administrator. And in that conversation, they understand that there's a specific budget, a specific number of people. And so we try to get them to agree amongst themselves what the priority areas should be. And we're also looking for that bang for the buck. How can we work with all of these environmental organizations to achieve all of their goals, but do it in a way sequentially that makes the most sense from an environmental protection standpoint and the priorities of the president? I think that the only way you do it, and this is something that I've done from day one, is bring people to the table and have the hard conversations and let everyone hear everyone and walk out that room with some next steps. You may not agree, but at least you understand and everyone understands what you're working with.
Well, I'll pivot and paraphrase a little bit. It's this a little more personal. But how are you doing in the role? How do you and where do you find balance in your life? Advice that you might have for busy executives trying to find that balance and joy in their everyday. And I'm listening hard.
That's a gotcha question. Yeah. Well, that is working with the assumption that I found that balance.
I assume you have.
I think we all struggle with that, right? And I think we all struggle with that balance. What I'll say is I have tried my best to listen to those who care about me the most and solicit feedback on how well I'm doing with that balance. And
family members
members,
okay.
Family members and friends. And I think, you know, once you all try this once or twice, you'll realize that, you know, this is a continual feedback loop. Mm-hmm. And there's constant mid-course correction. I'm mission driven, and I think one of the things that I recognize is I only know for sure that President Biden has 4 years. We're hoping for 8. But right now we're working on a 4-year window, so I have to get as much done as possible. And thankfully my family has accepted that sacrifice along with me. Mm-hmm. So if I had to answer that question thinking about it as a career, 8 years, 12 years, well, I would say I'm not doing a very good job. Mm. But because I only have 4 years that I know of, and that we have this awesome opportunity right now to invest $100 billion into our economy, do it in a way that's equitable, drive down the threat from the climate crisis, elevate every single community in this country, I wake up every single day ready to tackle those problems.
So you have the joy, you have the purpose, but finding that balance and that harmony is challenging, it sounds like, which I can certainly understand. I don't even like I think it's a great question, but I don't use the word balance. You know, I talk about harmony, yeah. Right? Sometimes we might do a very late night call because someone wants to have dinner with their family, right? So you're not on a set schedule, you're not necessarily balancing things, but you're finding harmony within all that you've got going on.
I agree with that answer.
Yeah. I didn't say I'm doing it. Yeah, okay. How can the private sector best leverage our climate efforts as EPA considers new regulations?
I think it's as simple as coming to the table, offering to come to the table as early as possible, and having conversations broader than the 1 or 2 regulations that are hot for the day. I think that we have to be creative and entrepreneurial and thoughtful together. And let me just say, I don't believe that there's anyone at the EPA who believes that we're creating jobs, that we're driving the economy, that we're the most innovative. I think that we understand our role extremely well. And so I think the way that we work the best together is through a partnership, a transparent, continual engagement on how we protect the planet, protect the environment and public health, but create jobs and be economically competitive on a global level. I think we all share that. And I think if that's the North Star, I think we can do a much better job.
Yeah, no, I agree on that. And maybe a follow-up I'd ask more philosophically. If you look at North Carolina, if you look at, you know, the Deep South, I don't know if you call North Carolina the Deep South per se, and then you look at California, where we are here in the coastal states, do you think that there is the same awareness around climate and the work that you're doing? And I'm not saying that, maybe what I'm asking is, do you believe that the appreciation and the urgency to act is now accepted in uniform? Or as you travel throughout the country, are you still out making a case for the work you're doing in the first place?
Right.
Because here it's easy. You know, this audience, we're all behind you and deeply supportive, looking for ways to partner.
Sure. Do
you find that when you're visiting other pockets of the country, particularly rural communities, southern communities?
I do. If the question is what I think it is, which is the people, not the politicians, but the people. When I engage with people all across this country, very few people don't recognize the impacts of climate change. Very few people don't want to embrace technology and clean energy policies, but they are in the grips of certain industries that really are the economic engines of their communities, give the most to their churches, contribute to the museums. So these people want to break the cycle, but it's very difficult to do with some of these industries that are embedded throughout the South and throughout some of the Midwest as well. And so, and then it's not as if we don't have gerrymandering and all kinds of issues with voting. So the current Congress may not reflect the will of the people. And the only way that you find it out is for yourself, and that's to travel and talk and have these conversations. Right. But I can guarantee you the people in Louisiana don't want to be known as the petrochemical community or Cancer Alley. They're looking for solutions. And those petrochemical facilities can embrace some technologies that can reduce that, but they haven't had that pressure. So my answer is yes. People all across this country, young and old, recognize the power of clean energy and clean technology. And there's not a person in this country that is not experiencing wildfire smoke or a flood in their basement or a hurricane or a tornado ripping through their communities. Everybody is, you don't have to believe a scientist. You look out your window. People are experiencing this. We have to remove this grip that certain industries have on our communities and on our political system.
That's well said. That's well said. Well, Administrator, just a couple more questions, and you've been so gracious, and thank you, audience members, for the questions you submitted. I want to give you the floor to speak about maybe two things. One, if there are any other programs or key initiatives that we haven't touched on that you want to make sure that our leaders in the audience are aware of. And then maybe secondly, just out of those initiatives that you're working on, where your real target and priority focus is over the next 12 months.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, and thank you all. This is just great to be able to have these conversations because they're so important. And I think that you studied very well and asked all the right questions. And so there may be a few that I want to double down on, and that is this notion that I know that I cannot do my job effectively without you all. And I have a 9-year-old son that I'm very proud of, and I want him to live in a country that is competitive, that has job opportunities, is known for its technology, but is safe and has breathable air and clean water. And I think that as long as we understand that we have to work together to achieve those goals, we can achieve those goals. I'd like to double down on this $27 billion greenhouse gas reduction fund. This is an honest effort by the agency to design a program where we look at maximizing investment in low carbon technologies that really will win the future. And we know that if we do it right, and if we have the right partners, that we can leverage trillions of dollars at some point out there to turn this economy around, create a lot of jobs, more importantly, protect this planet and my 9-year-old son, Matthew. So I believe that we can do this together. Yellow school buses, $27 billion in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, $3 billion for environmental justice and equity. These are all things that everyone should be for. And I recognize that there are some politicians that say they're not for this in DC, but when you see these investments happening in their districts, it's a different story at home. So we have to keep hope and recognize that even though North Carolina and California are not exactly the same culturally, I guarantee you that the majority of people in both states want everything that I just laid out.
Yeah. Well, I fully agree with that. And the last question I want to ask you is about being effective in building consensus. And again, we've been honored to have you here, Administrator. You've been so effective in your role. The question is about, and don't give any secrets if you don't want to give them out, but what have been the secrets to you being effective in building consensus and being a strong communicator? And then maybe if you just share what are some of the lessons you've learned coming from, obviously, an important role in North Carolina, but leaving to run the EPA is quite a big jump. Lessons that you might have learned as you reflect on your tenure to date, those key lessons and nuggets.
I think the key lessons are, you don't get everything you want. So you have to be consensus focused, and everyone deserves a seat at the table, even those who are going to disagree with you. And I learned that in North Carolina. And I think that we did some amazing things in North Carolina because I was willing to sit down and trade ideas and really believe that the best idea can win. Our politics are so divisive, the way we operate doesn't have to be. And I think that I was lucky enough to work for a governor who believed in building consensus. And as you all saw with President Biden in the debt ceiling, I think you saw a president who said, I am not going to get everything I want, but I'm going to get what the people of America need. And so there was some conversations that ensued that a lot of people on the fringe ends didn't really agree with, but he stayed focused. Well, it's a privilege to work for a president like that because that style is on full display during a debt ceiling debate, but that's on full display for those of us who work for him every day. And so it helps me in this role. I know, again, absent the industries that I regulate, if we can't come to a consensus, everything will just end up in court. Everything sometimes will end up in court anyway, but at least you have less things that are litigated against. So I believe in consensus building. I believe in hearing people out. I believe in meeting people where they are. And I believe that at the end of the day, that if we're all strong in our convictions, the best ideas can win, and that's best for the country.
Wow, that is how you close out what I hope has been a very informative and productive discussion. Certainly we are so deeply grateful, Administrator, for having you join us, and let's give it up for Administrator Regan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man.
Yeah,
I
it's
love
great
that.
to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Yeah.
We went electric. We wanted to do our part to help the environment. The second was the rebates that are available to us right now that make this project affordable. Our gas heater was from 1962. And so we knew that we needed to replace it. Here's our heat pump mini split. One of the cool features of having a mini split in our home, we're not in every room at all times. And so this one is just heating the room that we're in. So it's more efficient in that way. We've never had air conditioning in our home and we didn't feel like we needed it. When we were replacing this system, now we have air conditioning to boot and we didn't have to pay more for that. That's like icing on the cake. This is our heat pump water heater. The cost of putting in the electric heat pump water heater with the rebates and the incentives was significantly less than installing a gas water heater. I was so thankful and happy for Peninsula Clean Energy and the programs that they offer. Like, it made it affordable for my family.
San Jose Clean Energy is your local, not-for-profit clean energy provider. As a program of the City of San Jose, we build and source clean electricity at competitive rates. You're making a big impact in the fight against climate change just by being our customer. We're here for you. We can help you manage and lower your bill. We reinvest all revenues into our community through competitive, stable rates and programs that create healthier neighborhoods. You are at the core of what we do, and we're proud to serve you with transparency and accessibility. Switching to cleaner sources of energy will lead to better air quality and a healthier San Jose for our families. San Jose Clean Energy, for you, for me, for our future.
Visit watersavings.org to see if you qualify for a rebate of up to $100,000 per pre-approved conservation project. Valley Water's Water Efficiency Technology Program can help your facility modernize with the latest water-efficient technology and save money on your water bill and energy bill too. Demonstrate that your business is a water conservation leader. Does your business use water outdoors? Transform your lawn to an attractive, low water use landscape and retrofit your irrigation equipment with high-efficiency options. Our landscape rebate has increased to up to $100,000 per project. Whether you manage a multifamily complex or a commercial, industrial, or institutional facility like a school, park, hospital, or government agency, you can take advantage of Valley Water's rebates and programs. Visit watersavings.org to get started.
Ace Rail is back on board. Take a seat and let Ace do the driving. With stops from Stockton to San Jose, it's a great way to save time, relax, and save the environment. Visit acerail.com for more information.
Maybe it's the air, the water, or the fertile land. But good things grow fast in Silicon Valley. Big ideas come from anywhere, even a garage. Here, those sparks, those what-ifs, become reality. That's why going electric is catching on the road, in the home, a cleaner, better valley. Let's lead the way and make a big difference. Silicon Valley Clean Energy.
Get ready for the new SVLG podcast, Silicon Valley Vibes, featuring guests like Van Jones, former Vice President Al Gore, and many more. With your hosts SVLG's Nadia Anderson and Peter Leroux Munoz. Get it now, wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, everyone. I'm Balak Tang, SVLG's SVP of Government Relations, and I'm happy to be here to introduce our next panel, Mass Transit at the Last Stop. As you all know, public transit is at an inflection point. The outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic not only changed how people travel, it also changed to a degree how people think about their commute overall and their desired mode of travel. Nationally, we saw real impacts on ridership following the COVID-19 lockdowns and updated models for work and in-office time. According to the American Public Transit Association, local economies bore the brunt of the impact associated with declines in ridership. Recovery is underway. However, there are headwinds ahead. In California, transit is facing what's coined as a fiscal cliff, and agencies could run out of money for operations if the legislature does not intervene. This shortfall is due to a number of factors, including declining ridership and inflation, and if additional funding doesn't come through, we could see cuts in service, layoffs, and capital projects put into jeopardy. This is a topic that warrants increased attention, so we've convened a group of those leading in those conversations from the federal, state, and local levels to now only share what they're seeing, but to make sure you're aware of where things currently stand and what's at stake when it comes to the future of transit. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce our panel. Veronica Vanterpool is Deputy Administrator of the Federal Transit Administration, where she supports the Administrator Nuria Fernandez and Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg and the FTA team at advancing the policy objectives and goals of the Biden-Harris administration. Jeff Tumlin is Director of Transportation for the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency. In this role, he oversees the municipal railway, parking, traffic engineering, bicycle and pedestrian safety, transportation accessibility, taxi regulations for the city and county of San Francisco. Michelle Bouchard is Executive Director of Caltrain, where, among other projects, she is currently overseeing a $2.44 billion electrification project, which will modernize Caltrain service starting in 2024. Carolyn Gonot is General Manager and Chief Executive Director of Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority. She rose through the ranks of the VTA, and she is now responsible for over 2,000 employees that deliver transit services and provide mobility solutions for more than 2 million people who live and work in the Silicon Valley. Moderating the panel is Darlene G., Senior Vice President at SVLG member company HNTB. HNTB is a full-service architectural engineering and planning firm. Darlene has been the principal and project manager for numerous projects and contracts with BART, SFMTA, AC Transit, and Contra Costa Transportation Authority, among many others. They have a lot to discuss, so please join me in welcoming our panelists to the stage.
Well, good afternoon. It is a distinct pleasure to be here today with such an illustrious panel. I've personally spent a great deal of my career delivering transit, so this is also not only a pleasure for me, but very personal about the topic. So I want to dive right in and start by asking Carolyn to get us started here with the fact that the pandemic and remote work, we all know, have changed things a lot, right? And have affected transit agencies differently. Can you give us some thoughts about how you've adjusted transit service to accommodate the now?
Yeah, one of the things that VTA with Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority is that we had just implemented a Next network. We did a lot of work within Santa Clara County, not San Mateo, but Santa Clara County, to find out, where we could make changes and really start to make services more available for what we thought were people who needed transit as an option, more midday service, more weekend service, more late night service. And so what made that January 2020, the pandemic hit in March 2020. So of course our ridership plummeted, but it started to come back relatively soon. So the thing is really focusing on what you would call your essential workers, but meanwhile also that ability to be able to, as you brought your services back on, to actually know what routes those were. And we were actually already had that network. But I think it's been a lot of learning experience. I was in Utah when the pandemic first hit, running the Utah Transit Authority, and I will say on there, we took some of the services that we had off of the commuter rail market because that had gone down quite a bit, sorry, and Michelle, but it had gone down because it was a very heavily commute market. And we took those hours and put it on a route and put more hours on that route because we had more ridership on that route during the pandemic than pre-pandemic, which told us we were underserving the transit dependent of the people who really needed transit to go places. And I think that's true for a lot of us in the Bay Area. We just, maybe not San Francisco, we haven't been able to invest at the level per capita that we would really like to make us a really good transit system going forward. So the pandemic is really learning who you're, not just learning who the new market will be in the future, but responding to the market almost continuously as to what you need to put out on the street.
We had a very similar experience in San Francisco and Muni, where during the worst days of COVID, we knew we needed to make the system faster, more frequent, and more reliable in order to manage the social distancing rules. So we built 21 new miles of transit-only lanes. We abandoned all of our schedules and simply asked our operators to space themselves out evenly in order to improve reliability. And the result of that is we've held on to those changes even now, and we're seeing that driving all of our ridership. Even in the city with the slowest rate of return to office of arguably any place in the world, our high-frequency lines that do not go downtown are at between 120 to 120% of pre-COVID ridership weekdays, and already up to 153% of pre-COVID ridership weekends and midday. Which we had never expected would be possible. Investing in making transit fast, frequent, reliable, clean, safe is the key to ridership, and then also focusing on the new emerging ridership patterns, which are not focused on peak period commute service downtown, but neighborhood to neighborhood service and neighborhood to essential institution service.
I can provide a little bit of our experience. And as Carolyn pointed out, I mean, we have as a commuter railroad, we were very highly dependent on our fare box. And we had most of our riders, commuters, riding in the peak period. And that was the hallmark of our success. We were covering over 70% of our operating costs through the fare box, like unheard of. But so you can imagine, once COVID hit, and for this prolonged period where work from home is more the rule than the exception, we've had to adapt, and we've adapted in some of the same ways that Jeff and Carolyn talk about. We are not as flexible in terms of being able to move vehicles to different routes. We have one route, and God willing, the vehicle stays on that route. But what we have done is we've really invested a lot in the weekend and the off-peak times, and that's where we've seen the growth too. That's the biggest learning that we've had.
Deputy Administrator Vanterpool, you've seen firsthand that this whole issue that we're discussing is not just a Bay Area issue. And we'd love to hear if you could share with us some other examples, other changes, things that you've seen nationally that contribute to thoughts on this.
So just some context on Federal Transit Administration. We are one of 9 agencies within the U.S. Department of Transportation. And we have 2 key roles. Number one is we take our taxpayer dollars and we invest them in subways and light rail cars and ferries and buses. Our second role is we provide safety oversight for all of the transit systems across the United States. So this is not a unique situation that we're experiencing in California. We have certainly seen the pandemic have a significant toll on transit systems across the United States. In fact, by 2024, the fiscal cliff or the funding shortfall due to decreased revenue and reduced ridership is going to be about $1.2 billion. In 2 years, that shortfall across the top 25 transit agencies, and those are those agencies with the highest ridership, we're going to see a $10.3 billion shortfall. That is significant because we know that our transit systems support our workforce, they support our economies, they mitigate climate change, and in fact, many of the goals at the Federal Transit Administration and priorities are very much the same priorities that SVLG has: climate mitigation, affordable housing, innovation, sustainable workforce, sustainable infrastructure, and workforce development. We have those same priorities at Federal Transit. And those are our priorities because we know when you invest in public transit systems, you're investing in each of those priorities. So what we've seen is transit systems have to be nimble, have to pivot. So we've seen our systems across the United States redesign their bus networks to address the gaps in service and to think differently about the provision of transit service. We've seen reinvestments and expansion of service actually in some communities, as we've heard on the, from my colleagues, thinking differently about the provision of service on the weekends and thinking about how we expand service during those hours where people are commuting in late night or early morning hours, particularly for the service industry. These are some of the lessons that we've learned during the pandemic. What we are seeing are successful measures is promotions around special events, for example. So transit agencies are thinking, well, how do we attract people back to our systems? And some systems are being very creative. So you may have heard in New Jersey, 80,000 people took NJ Transit to a Taylor Swift concert, right? And you may have heard in New York City actually just hit its 4 million rider mark per day. Just recently. And this is because the transit agencies are talking and thinking differently about fare promotion, different sorts of fare policies, and then again, thinking differently about how they're providing service, expanding their service, redesigning their networks.
Thank you. The pandemic, we all know, it changed a lot, and it changed it really fast. And so we have a very uncertain environment. We all know that. We deal with it every day. All of you deal with it every hour, I'm sure. So when do you think we're going to get to the new normal? And can you talk to us a little bit about how you're working with your public, your riders, in terms of helping to shape that new normal? Michelle, you want to start?
I'll start. First of all, the phrase new normal is not my favorite. I don't, I say, and because for the longest time it was oh well, back to pre-pandemic. I think what we need to accept is take all of the good learning out of the pandemic. We changed our schedule 7 times. That's unheard of. Trying different things. So I don't have a crystal ball that'll tell you when we're going to get back a significant number of riders. I do think what's critical, we talk about fare promotions, et cetera. We need to understand and reconnect with the communities in which we operate. And by communities, I'm talking about riders, we're talking about residents, and we're also talking about businesses and institutions. We need to create the types of relationships that would lead to an understanding of what a critical role transportation and transit plays in each of their lives and how it will drive the success of the economy. So I really think new normal, not talking about that, but we really do need to establish a nimble approach to how we can identify methods for growth and pursue them vigorously, and if they don't work, drop them. Move on to the next thing.
Jeff, your thoughts?
So for BART, Caltrain, and Muni, all of our lost ridership is associated with the empty 30 Transamerica Pyramids worth of office space in downtown San Francisco. Those are the riders we're missing. There is no scenario in which that downtown San Francisco office space remains vacant. The question is, what uses will fill that space and how quickly? We're already starting to see a significant change driven by a collapse in commercial rents. This is always the sign that we look for in a cyclical San Francisco economy that marks the beginning of the new boom cycle. We're starting to see that, and we're also starting to see another really important signal, which is bankruptcies. And this is very important and very positive because we need commercial office building and hotel bankruptcies in order to refinance the financial instruments that have minimum commercial rents built into those leases. All of that needs to be rebuilt. Property values and rents need to be adjusted, and that unlocks the amazing thing about this region, and that's unlike any other previous bust cycle, where new job creation is still at a high and unemployment is at a low, and new businesses are forming that need physical space to come together in because business is rooted in trust And trust is a biological phenomenon that requires people be in the same room together and be able to go out to the amazing bars and restaurants and nightclubs that San Francisco offers so well. So that's the question for us, is how quickly is that space going to fill? What is it going to fill with? And in the meantime, how do we continue sustaining the services that we have without collapsing? Because there is no economic recovery in this region without transit.
Yeah, exactly.
Very, very well said.
So I think, you know, within Silicon Valley, and I think many of you are from here, of course, is that, you know, the market, we are seeing more people come to work, back into work, into the Santa Clara County region than we have, I think, than into San Francisco. But we also are aware that we're not going to be maybe in the same realm. People are coming in 3 days a week instead of 5 days a week, and those types of patterns. Now, it's interesting with my staff because I keep saying, those buildings that look sort of vacant, they're never going back to orchards. They're not going to be orchards again. They're not going to take them down and say, we're going to go back to orchards. They are going to be something, as Jeff said. We don't know what they will be. And what we've really done is gone out and engaged the cities, because Santa Clara County, or Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority is also the congestion management agency, so we deal a lot with the land use and the transportation. You sort of automatically do that because you're part of the city and the county, but we do a lot of that work and engage the city. So we're trying to go out there right now and find out where the city's at. So we're developing a visionary network that's actually looking at what can we do for the riders that we have and so that more people could come on. We're also looking at markets like, how do we serve restaurant workers and how do we serve grocery workers? Instead of going, this is the kind of service we should provide, we want to go out and say, what is the kind of service you need? And then we need to provide that service. And it's going out and really sort of measuring that kind. And it may not be the typical fixed route bus. Microtransit's out there now where it's the ability to get to major core routes, and we're looking at that throughout our county. But it's really building that out. We're looking at new technologies that help us run faster. In a way, for good or bad about the pandemic, in a way it's given us room to step back and reimagine, and that's probably the, you know, for me, one of the funnest things to do in transportation is to actually have that opportunity in time to look at everything that's going on. How do we use particularly technology to transform what we're doing? And that engagement and actually trying to work with other industries, as you said, it's really engaging. Engaging is really important. We can't stay in our own area and start designing the way we normally do. I do think that rules, regulations, policies, those may have to change over time to allow that flexibility for us to be able to make quick changes. Everybody could do that in the pandemic. In a way that was wonderful, you know, but we couldn't, and take risks.
Right.
As public agencies, we don't tend to take risks as much as others do because of the bureaucracies and you know, you're stewards of public monies. But I think, you know, I think we need to be able to, I think transportation industry is going to have to take risks, and we're going to need leaders who are willing to do that, and we need boards that understand that. We need elected officials, and we need programs that understand that that's what we need to do.
Well said. Veronica, you have some thoughts?
We can't and shouldn't discuss the new normal of transportation without addressing the abnormal in housing, in climate change, in traffic congestion. So we are seeing, with regards to climate, unprecedented events. Canada is burning. I live in DC. It's a code purple today. Many of you are familiar with those codes and those AQIs and the indices that impact our day-to-day. Traffic congestion is, in many communities, at pre-pandemic levels again. And housing affordability is a big problem in many communities across the United States, and it's leading to unprecedented levels and rates of unsheltered individuals in our communities. So those are the abnormals that we should not be thinking of as the new normals. All of these are interrelated variables and factors. So when we think about the connection of transportation, our network, but more specifically our public transit systems, and how each of those other factors, housing, climate change, traffic congestion, are all interrelated. We have to start thinking very differently about this conversation. We can't just be talking about them independently. They are so codependent.
Very. Very, very important point. Now I'm going to ask you all a question that I know comes up every day, and you've heard it over and over. But I came from another conference this morning, and it is a top priority for everyone related to thinking about transit, and that is safety and security.
Mm-hmm.
So talk with us a little bit about what you're all doing in that arena. And my key question with that is not just that you're trying to address it, but have you had any places where you've really been able to measure some success?
Do you want to?
Sure, I'll dive in. I mean, this is something that is top of mind for all of us. I mean, really, I think for most of us, the two top issues that we're contending with, number one is the fiscal cliff, and are we going to be able to be offering service next year? And two is we call it safety and security, but I think it's important to name what our riders are really concerned about, which is untreated mental health and addiction issues on the street, which inevitably find their way onto public transit. So if you look at our reported crime rate is at or near historic lows. It's less than a quarter of what it was a decade ago, even on a per capita or a per mile basis. The problem is we have people with untreated mental health and addiction issues causing problems on transit and frightening our riders. And in terms of developing ridership, it's the perception factor is far more important than actual reported violent crime rates. So one of the things that I've been talking to the state about is there was a promise made here in California when we shut down one of the best developed mental health care systems in the world. And that promise was that the state would fund community treatment in all cities. It is foolish to try to delegate to municipalities, let alone transit agencies, the responsibility for dealing with a systemic issue like mental health and addiction in California. This is a topic where we absolutely need the state of California to step it up. We know from examples anywhere in Western Europe and through much of Latin America and East Asia what the solutions are to these problems. They are well studied, they are solvable, but they require acknowledging what the real problem is and funding known solutions. That said, we're also dealing with a lot of training across all of our public-facing folks. We're investing in ambassador programs, de-escalation training across all of our workforce, and working to try to cultivate a sense of civility on our vehicles rather than employing aggressive police techniques, because the latter doesn't actually solve the underlying problem, but supporting compassion and engaging with our riders about what the issues are and how to manage them is the best that we can do as transit operators.
And it's true. And I want to agree with Jeff on the homelessness. I mean, I think most all of us can agree with that is an issue. And it does, you know, we do talk about if we got the ridership up, there's a feeling of safety with more riders on the vehicles with us. But we've also noticed at Santa Clara County, we're dealing with the homelessness. You know, we can put the cameras on. I have a new chief system safety and security officer who's coming in, and we've done a lot of work right now on, it is on perception, but it's also the psychological safety of people right now, and them feeling comfortable that the service feels safe to them, not just with the homelessness, but that we have drivers that care and they feel like it's a quality service that's being out there for them. I also think that with the service that's going, with the people who are coming, the comments that we get oftentimes is about sort of the homelessness, but it's also about the presence of security officers. And we've had a lot of issues because we use the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office. You know, I had a meeting with them the other day where they're going to have to cut, I'm not going to say cut, they don't have enough officers, so they're going to we're going to have to take a cut in some of our division patrol, even though we could pay for it, but because they need to place them in other areas. They need to spread out the county sheriffs. Law enforcement, we're really stuck, and it's because people don't want to go. We also need it's their presence that is really important, and it's response time. And the thing that we've seen an increase in is the report of operator assaults, and how they get reported to FTA or through other programs or through other areas is different than the way our operators perceive an assault. So that's one thing we're working on. We're working on with the state. Each agency has to go to the state separately to get legislation to prohibit someone from being on your bus who is threatening assaults, being very abusive or that. We have to individually, as an agency, because we're running that legislation now for us, we want to go in the bill with Santa Cruz County, and they didn't want to carry two. They want to carry one at a time because of the reason why. So there's just barriers in place to make our operators feel safe as well. And it does feel like, and I'm going to say this, whether it's true or, whether it's my perception or not, there is a brazenness. And I was talking to a lot of transit police chiefs around the country, Houston, Atlanta, and that. There's somewhat of a brazenness right now for people to feel that they can say what they want to do or behave in a way that we would not have done before, somewhat abusively to a frontline worker. And you've got to realize, like our bus operators, our light rail operators, but particularly our bus operators, they are out there driving, a 40,000 ton, I don't exactly know I forgot how many tons it is, 40,000 pound vehicle along the streets, trying to keep their passengers safe, trying to be safe, trying to make sure their people are getting there. We're, making sure they're not causing any issues with all the other activity around them. They are one of the loneliest people sitting out there. And so the more technology we can use to support their activities, to support their ability to understand their routes, to give them, there are lots of technologies now on training for vehicles that actually help provide accidents and prevent accidents. Those types of things helps them focus more and feel more relaxed as well. But really the assaults and the reporting on those assaults drive people away as well. If you hear that we can't keep our drivers safe, how are we going to keep our riders safe?
I can only amplify a couple of things that both Carolyn and Jeff pointed out. I will say one of the things that Caltrain did during the pandemic is we took a look inside to figure out, okay, if we want to have the safest environment out there, how do we value safety within the culture of our own organization? And it was a lot of self-reflecting, and we found some stuff that maybe wasn't the greatest. But we've spent the last year and a half now really emphasizing safety culture within our organization, and that has led to things like de-escalation training for conductors, identifying systems that could help us in terms of reporting. And I have to say, we're fortunate, thank you FTA, and thank you partners, we're going to be bringing in a whole new fleet of vehicles. We're going to have a riding environment that is brand new, state of the art, and so we have the fortunate ability to change out what does look old and potentially, it's never not safe, but it's really, that new car smell goes a long way. Let me put it that way.
It's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
I have a question I think you're all going to be interested in, especially for the people in this group, and that is, I understand the Deputy Administrator really walks the talk, so to speak, and that you have given up your car entirely. And I think we're just curious, how has that really affected your view of transit and lifestyle? And I think I'm looking at this room and guessing that there is probably no one in here that doesn't have a car or have easy access to a car. So, well, you live in San Francisco. But I think hearing your views of it would be very interesting.
So it's because of my role and because of my work for the past 16 years that I made that decision. So I have confidence in our public transit systems. I've also made a choice to live in a community that allows all these different options for me to get around. So I live in DC, where I can take the metro, and I do, where I can walk to work, where I can bike to work, and I can ride share, right, and car share. But my advocacy in this space for 16 years has been to ensure that our state legislatures and our municipal governments make these investments in these systems. I'm fortunate to be able to live in a community that affords me these options. I made that choice, but I recognize in this work that not everyone has that decision. So we need to ensure that we're making these investments so people can make a decision. I know that owning a vehicle is on average $12,000 a year. It is an expensive, depreciating asset. And not everyone has the luxury nor the privilege to invest in that depreciating asset. So in this work, I'm committed to making sure that I do live that walk and that talk. So a very specific example, can it be, it can be more productive when you're using transit. So I'm from New York. I used to run an advocacy organization, nonprofit. We had an office in Camden, New Jersey. It took 3.5 hours one way for me to get from home to that office, which I did quarterly. I had a car, but I opted to do that 3.5 hours instead of taking that 2-hour drive because I was more productive. Sitting for 2 hours in traffic was less productive and not worth my time than for me to ride transit 3.5 hours. So for those of us who are incredibly busy and think that doesn't fit into your very busy lifestyle, I would challenge you to say, how much work do you get when you're behind the wheel? And you are actually driving that vehicle and not being driven in that vehicle. So, again, I recognize that that is not an option for everyone, but it is important for us to think about providing those options on a larger scale.
And hopefully you're not texting or emailing while you're driving in that vehicle. Okay. I want to raise an issue about the future because in today's world, it can be very easy to be very gloomy, maybe a little doom and gloom. And here in the Bay Area, where we keep being told, we're at the bottom of the heap in terms of comeback and transit. At the same time, we have a lot of data and a lot of planning that says by 2050, we'll be a much bigger region, maybe as much as another 1.5 million households. Sometimes listening to the daily news here, that's a little hard to imagine, but I am very curious for all of you to share what your agencies are thinking about the future and how you continue to make transit part of that future, because when we think about the traffic out there, and I've tackled it twice today myself, when we think about the traffic, we think about the congestion, we think about all the interrelated issues that the Deputy Administrator brought up with housing and just so many things that come together. And then, of course, why we're here today, right? Sustainable and climate and things that are going to impact all of our lives. What are some of the thoughts your agencies have about how you see transit growing in the future, knowing that it's going to have to if we're going to accommodate growth?
Yeah. I'll jump in. I mean, I'm sure at times has been gloomy for all of us. I think one of the great outcomes of the pandemic is certainly in the Bay Area. I've seen the transit agencies coordinate and certainly at the GM level, really, really try and dig in to identify and find resolution to regional problems. And so I think one of the things that is really going to be a measure of this success in the future is how we continue to be knit together as Bay Area agencies in order to provide regional solutions. Having said that, I know at the Caltrain organization, while we are diversifying, we are transforming the railroad. We'll be operating those snazzy new trains in about 1.5 years. We know that bringing this electrified service on can allow us to really provide much more service on the off times and really be able to provide the robust service that all sorts of communities and types of riders need. We really need to provide different products within the very kind of not very nimble mode that is commuter rail. Having said that, we are a commuter rail. We are trying to transition to more of a regional rail style, but we got to fill those buildings.
That's right.
And we'll be there to provide the service.
Everything that Michelle said. And in addition, in San Francisco, we're fortunate that we're both the Department of Transportation. So I manage the streets and I run Muni, which carries about half of the region's transit riders. And so during COVID, we were able to dramatically transform the system, and we're seeing sustained 15 to 25% improvement in transit speed and reliability on our main lines. We eliminated major delays in our subway by over 60%, and we're holding on to those improvements. And I think our partnership with the other regional operators is not only getting them to see what they could do, but also getting the other municipalities who they're dependent upon to step up and manage their streets better. Most importantly, one of the things that I'm most excited about is Caltrans is now coming to the table. Caltrans is realizing that the state transportation system, the state highways are not getting any wider. We're no longer demolishing low-income neighborhoods to add traffic lanes, and the state is growing. And so the only choice that Caltrans has is to manage the state highway system to prioritize the movement of people and goods rather than just the movement of vehicles. So they were enthusiastic about us striping carpool lanes on Lombard Street, which they control. And they're getting increasingly enthusiastic about creative ways of using existing travel lanes to prioritize the movement of people and are getting ready to step up their leadership. With Caltrans leadership and with all of the regional transit operators working together, and increasingly the region's cities working together, I think the future is actually amazingly positive for transit in the Bay Area if we can get through the next 3 years of recovery with state operating support.
Okay, and with Santa Clara County, we're currently about 25% of the Bay Area population is within Santa Clara County, and VTA not only runs the transit operations, but we also are a major implementer of highway projects. We run the express lanes in Santa Clara County. We also do a lot of work with the bicycle improvements and help build those. And in fact, it was interesting. 2 nights ago, we won the at the CTF, California Transportation Foundation Awards, like their Oscars for California transportation. We won the Interchange Project of the Year. But what won that Interchange Project of the Year was, yes, there were safety improvements that were done and a rebuild of it, but it was the bicycle improvement and the connection that we made of connecting these two communities. That it was amazing the number of people who talked about how often they didn't go that way. They had kids, they traveled differently. Our elected officials who grew up in the area were talking about the same thing. But it won because of the other improvements in being able to make those connections in other ways for bicycle improvements. And Santa Clara County is a fairly flat county outside of the hills that it lies in. So biking is a huge effort. And so we're building this big central bikeway expressway that will actually be able to connect to our major transit hubs. We have transit-oriented development, a huge portfolio within VTA itself that we're looking at building housing and affordable housing combined with mixed use. And so there's a whole series of things that we're doing to get ready, but it's the idea of bringing those activities together to support transit, not just within our county, but within the region. We have a huge hub called the Diridon Station in San Jose that will be, if high-speed rail, when high-speed rail, or if and when high-speed rail get here. But even with Caltrain and the number of trains that will be running and all the other services that come down, and VTA's building BART into San Jose and over to that station, that will have over 500 train trips going in and out of it a day. Because our light rail goes there as well. Most people don't know that, but that is a lot of travel that would be transferred. That whole area will transform. There are lots of things to be excited for transportation and for transit. And we have a workforce right now that wants to take transit. They don't want to own cars. They don't want to put the money into owning a car. Cars are much more expensive today than they were maybe when we bought them years ago. So I think, our focus right now is really building the synergies in all of our systems to make sure they support each other so that transit does well. Our quality of life, I am a true believer that transportation is absolutely plays a major role in the quality of life, and that we offer the services to continue to help improve and sustain a really good quality of life in Santa Clara County and the region. And I think it's important to understand how the systems integrate.
Great. So we have some great questions from the audience. I'm going to try to cover as much as possible from what I got. And then I want to reserve maybe a minute at the end for the Deputy Administrator to share kind of some big picture thoughts with us from the national perspective. So we have a couple questions that relate to technology. And I guess, again, being here in Silicon Valley today, it's always exciting to think that technology does help improve our lives, right? We all know that. We have certain aspects maybe we worry about, but I don't know, is AI going to take over running everything for us? Or talk a little bit about what you're all thinking about with technology related to how that helps the situation.
For us, I think, well, obviously, we're changing from diesel to electric, and so this is such a huge transformation. So that's the obvious thing. But I think, I just want to go back to, we run trains, but we're really transferring people from place to place. We happen to do it on a train. And so for us, I think we're looking into things, very modest investments in technology that can help us work with our customers better so we can provide for seamless schedule changes. So we can do things like provide information in ways that we cannot now to a larger base of customers because they need to know we're there if they're going to ride us. And so that's really what we're looking at.
In San Francisco, we're the city where both Uber and Lyft were born, where Cruise is headquartered, and Waymo is testing, and we actually probably have more autonomous vehicle testing in an urban site than the entire rest of the world combined. And yet, the only problems that we need technology to help us solve are problems, as Michelle said, around customer information and economic efficiency. Anytime somebody comes to me with a new technology around transportation, I ask 4 questions. 1, to what degree is this technology going to help me move more people in my fixed street rights of way? Number 2, to what degree is this technology going to help improve accessibility to services, particularly for people with the fewest choices, and especially people with disabilities, people with low incomes, people living in underserved communities? Number 3, to what degree is this technology going to advance safety in the roadway, particularly for vulnerable road users not actually using that particular technology? And number 4, how does this technology help us decarbonize the transportation sector, which is the biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in California? And so for those of you who are in the technology world, if you want to come pitch me on something, make sure you have a positive answer to all 4 of those questions. And most importantly, make sure you come prepared to share your actual performance data, not just what your marketing department wants to show us. Not that I have any bitterness around certain companies.
So it's been interesting. I have a brand, a lot of it is under this, the zero emission bus mandate that we have that's coming up is something that is, the technology of the buses is getting there. It's not quite at the battery level that we'd like, for the long routes. Yeah, we're also looking at hydrogen. And so there's a balance of that. The bigger issue is the infrastructure, the storage that you need. We're looking at a lot of technology and how do you manage 500, 600 bus fleet over 3 yards, and how do you are able to charge them, and when is the right time to charge them to avoid some of the peak hours and keep your operating costs down. That's technology that we really are trying to look at. We're looking at technology within the vehicle area, particularly in rail, and we were up recently at where they're getting their vehicles for Caltrain, and I was up there recently to look at light rail. Nobody in the country has light rail vehicles. They're built by this manufacturer who has the largest light rail fleets out there in Europe right now. But we're looking at taking light rail, which you've always seen the catenary, and being able to run it partly off rail on part of our system, then running it back on rail. And I know there's a little bit of that at Muni now, but it allows us for us to take it off the downtown. It allows us not to have to build the infrastructure that we need to do, which is very costly. We don't have enough people in the sector right now, as Michelle's starting to learn, on learning overhead catenary, how to take care of line workers, substations, those types of things. So any technologies or AI tools that can help us train better and be able to have the curriculum is very important to us. Workforce development I would say are the four things that, I mean, my agency right now, we're doing a huge organizational culture and climate transformation. And the four areas that we're looking at is communications. How do you communicate to people nowadays? Both internally, across, up and down, externally. How do we communicate? Well, how do we do our workforce development and leadership development? Workforce development is really critical there. And third is safety. That is absolutely critical, particularly psychological safety as well. And then the last is employee resources. I hate to say this, but being the agency that's sitting in Silicon Valley as a transit agency, we are not very technology savvy. And it drives me crazy because I'm from the engineering, I love industrial engineering, operations research type work. And I come in and go, where's the analytics? We have like no analytics. Everything is still a lot of paper. And we are moving to all those resources. So there's this whole area of being able to operate more efficiently, inventory supply tracking systems, understand 3D printing for obsolete parts. Those are the types of things that we are starting to look at. Cool. So I know I'm talking. You can tell I'm the engineer in me is coming out, but
businesses out here.
But there is all these abilities to use technology. I probably don't ask as many questions as Jeff. I get sort of wild at first, and then I have to figure out if there's a use for it. But I do. I would, there is definitely a focus in our agency that we have got to start to look at technology from all different ways. But I will say one of the reasons why we don't sometimes is it is really hard to do it in a sense of when you don't know what to do, can you sole source it? Our procurement processes are not nimble enough, and nor is our structures nimble enough, as I said, to take those risks. And I think it is up to leadership to be willing to take those risks, including your board and ourselves, to be able to do that and have a management team that supports that. And I think now, with all of us going through this pandemic, we've all had to take the risks. Now's the time and come and talk to us about what you can do to help us be more efficient, provide a safer system, cleaner system, faster system.
Opportunities unlimited. Okay, let me ask you, and because again, we had the Energy Secretary here today, and I heard several other things earlier in the conference today about power. And obviously, this comes up all the time. If we're all driving electric vehicles and you're all transitioning to electricity more and more and more, what are some of your thoughts or concerns or worries or plans related to the power grid itself? Is that an issue that is top of mind?
I would say I'm very nervous of what our utility companies can keep up to speed. I mean, we're mostly in this area, it's PG&E. When I was in Utah, it was Rocky Mountain Power. They were a lot more nimble. They were actually giving grants to us to be able to, grants to build overhead charging stations so that you could then use the charging stations and you would be using their power and you'd be paying them. But there was a lot more synergies and being able to work together. I think here I'm very nervous of whether our power companies are ready to help put that infrastructure in place. California is very lucky. We have a good hydrogen network.
Michelle looks scared
sorry,
enough.
I'm getting ready to climb on you. No, she did, it's a lot of work.
I just feel like there's such an emphasis on the vehicle, and the wayside and energy resiliency is not a huge focus, or at least not in the areas that I travel. Sorry, get off that. And so I'm just in violent agreement with you. I don't think the solution is just with the power companies, though. I think it's again a combination of policy and also like innovation. Like one of the things that I think is really important is to continue to develop battery technology. Right now it's big, heavy batteries, can't go very far, and that'll help us save on infrastructure in non-dense places. But we've got to continue to push that. But yeah, I'm concerned.
Yeah, and we're lucky here in California. We have a good hydrogen network and ability to maybe build it out. I actually looked when we were in Utah because there was a push to do some hydrogen. Their hydrogen network, overall in the state, we had like 40 public fueling stations. There were only 2 others in the entire rest of the country. And I don't even know, they weren't anywhere that was, I don't know what they were for. South Carolina and somewhere else, I forget who had it. But these other states have to build a network or build a distribution center that they don't have. I think we need to take advantage of that as well and the ability. But I think the technology in the industry for us is going to be absolutely critical, and how can we maintain it and not have it go so obsolete on us, because as transit agencies, we don't have the money to continuously turn it over every 2 or 3 years.
Converting Muni's last remaining biodiesel hybrid vehicles to electric or hydrogen is by far the least cost-effective thing that we could possibly do to advance climate. It would arguably worsen our greenhouse gas emissions, in part because it triggers $1 billion of rebuilding all of our bus facilities, many of which are over 100 years old, are completely out of code compliance, and need a complete reconstruction in order to adapt them to electric vehicles. I have many thoughts on this topic, but that's all I will say for now.
Given our time, Jeff, we'll...
I think one of the things that is the general managers in the Bay Area is there are a lot of unfunded mandates that the transit agencies deal with. And sometimes we're nervous that it's at the expense of service that we could provide, more service and better service out there. And so it makes me nervous thinking about having the money that we're going to spend on electric vehicles when I really want to put more service out on the street in the midday and the weekends and the night, and you have to trade that off. And I don't know if there's enough analysis to say the climate change benefits that you get for people not having to drive and having that option to take transit, where you start really picking up more versus the buses. I don't know that, and I don't think there's a lot of policy, as she said, that's been made. Mm-hmm. And then there's policy that we need made to look at those.
You can Google SFMTA Climate Action Plan and look at the cost-benefit charts of the various things that we might be able to do.
Great.
So there's analysis.
My apologies to those of you who shared a question that we're probably not going to get to, but I do want to let our Deputy Administrator from FTA share some of her thoughts to we're in historic times with the Biden administration. We're very grateful for that, and would love to hear some of your thoughts about what that may mean.
So the transit sector is experiencing an existential moment. And we've discussed some very real challenges that we're encountering right now in this industry. But it isn't all gloom and doom. So to answer this panel question, is mass transit at the last stop? No. We are actually, we have some wonderful positive stories to share. So let's start with the bipartisan infrastructure law, which gave the Department of Transportation $108 billion. That is an unprecedented historic amount of funding for transportation. What that means is it's allowed the Federal Transit Administration in fiscal year 22, our last fiscal year, to support 3,630 transit projects in your communities. That means we got $40 billion in formula funds and competitive grant funds to support our communities, to mitigate climate change, to support our workforce, to connect each other to one another, and to all the essential services that we know. We understand in this region that by 2050, all of the regional highways are going to be at capacity. In New York, in the New York metro area where I'm from, there was a study done many years ago that estimated the annual economic loss of traffic congestion was $20 billion. $20 billion. I can't imagine that that number is any different in this area. And that is also a region where traffic congestion is at capacity and the infrastructure is constrained. So when you think about transit investment, you're thinking about reducing that impact. Transit investment is also a Vision Zero strategy. So we talked about safety, and we talked about safety from the lens of, a very important lens of operator and rider safety. But when you invest in public transit systems, you're ensuring that our communities are a lot safer. So communities that invest in public transit have reduced traffic fatalities by 40% when they've coupled that investment with bike and pedestrian infrastructure. Many of you know that there's 43,000 traffic fatalities every single year. So when you're investing in transit, you're saving lives. We've talked about climate mitigation. So if one person converts his or her 20-mile commute from a vehicle to public transportation, they are saving 20 pounds a day of CO2 emissions. Now, many of you in this room may say, well, many of us are using greener cars, and that is true, but that infrastructure is still required to provide a place for your green car. And the more asphalt we have in our communities, the greater increase we have in greenhouse gas emissions. So you've heard this statistic. Transportation sector comprises 26% of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. In California, that's 40%. I also want to talk about the opportunity to, on a positive outlook, the investment that we've made in green technology. So there's greener buses in our communities, and we've heard our partners talk about that. FTA is a valuable supporter and partner in these investments, and that is reducing the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. And I want to end on this note. We are seeing states make the commitment to invest in their transit systems, and that's important. The federal government is a partner. We're not going to solely fund your transit systems. We need you as partners. And the you is the public sector and the private sector. It is important that we work together, and we are seeing some positive stories around the country of communities that are opting for ballot referendums to raise more revenue for their transit systems. And in fact, some of the cities that are experiencing the greatest fiscal cliffs and cities within states are showing some tremendous leadership. In New York, where I'm from, the governor actually is supporting transit with $1.1 billion in increased revenue. That's significant. And that should be a model for other states around this country. So I want to make that plea and that pitch that we are proud to be a partner, but we are a partner. We need your support and your contributions into this overall goal. And we know there are many, many shared goals here.
Well, we certainly hope that the governor and the legislature were listening, Veronica. I don't know about all of you, but this incredible panel has certainly made me feel that transit is not at the last stop. I remain optimistic, and I think they all deserve a great hand for being here today.
Good afternoon. So you had me at the beginning, you get me toward the end. I get to introduce Tom Steyer, and Tom Steyer is a philanthropist, an activist, an investor, and a business leader who has been a prominent voice on climate issues for over 15 years. Please welcome Tom to the stage. So Tom, you're a business leader, philanthropist, and activist, as I just shared, who's been quite vocal on climate issues for over a decade now. And I'd like to know, just off the top, where do you see the human society with respect to the climate crisis?
So if you look at the information that's been coming out over the last 5 months in 2023, the information from the natural world is pretty consistently worse than expected, both in terms of the pace of warming for a variety of reasons, including the fact that we're cleaning up aerosols from the air, which in fact have slowed the pace of climate change, but also to the speed with which the glaciers in Greenland and West Antarctica are melting. You know, the information is, as we get better science, as we get more detailed, granular studies, what we see is that the pace is very substantially faster than what scientists thought 2, 5, 10 years ago. And in general, if you look at virtually any piece of information from the natural world, it is a sign that, in fact, we're not bending the curve and that, if anything, the pace of change is increasing. On the other hand, as someone who spends the overwhelming bulk of his waking hours looking at what's possible to do about it, the technology, what is deployable now, what's in the pipeline, the costs compared to the status quo fossil fuel solutions, the tech is great. You know, I feel extremely optimistic about our ability to win in the marketplace, you know, in very broad scope. And so I think that this is going to be, for those two reasons, an absolutely critical decade in terms of our ability to bend the curve and prove that, in fact, that the technology S-curve that we've seen not just for years or decades, but literally for centuries, is in place, that in fact, these technologies are following that S-curve, and that the kinds of things that I've been trying to do in the company I started a couple years ago with my old friend and partner, Katie Hall, that we're going to win in the marketplace, and we're going to prove that in fact technology does make a big difference, and that we can in fact radically change the projections much better than people understand going forward. It's going to be a civil society thing. It's a all of society response, you know, of course, including, you know, political rulings and policy, but I absolutely believe that we have the capability in our hands to do a great job on this and have it be a great win for the United States and the people of the world.
So you've been quite vocal on climate issues for over a decade now. I'm just going to go a little bit through your journey. In 2009, you started funding nonpartisan research institutions at Stanford and Yale. And we just had a wonderful moment backstage with Fahmida Bangert, who was on Stanford's staff and doing lots of great stuff and saying, like, he was the trustee. He was the one who kept pushing it at Stanford. So even before you may have heard of him, he was being the rabble-rousel behind the scenes at Stanford as a trustee. Then you moved on to bankrolling political efforts, including No on Prop 23 that tried to undermine California's global warming law in 2010. That was successful. We beat back Prop 23. Yes on Prop 39 in 2012. That closed a tax loophole to fund some clean energy investments in schools. And you also founded Next Gen America to activate young people to act politically around the climate crisis. So what did you learn about the effectiveness of spending money on grassroots activation? What was kind of the best investments that you were making at that time?
So the way that I always thought about political investing, and let me say, the stuff at Stanford, just to put it in perspective, we put in money as grants for people on the Stanford campus to do in clean tech and climate response what Stanford has done for 80 years, 90 years in information technology, saying you have the ability to change this if you commercialize it. So we gave money to young people and postdocs and young professors to start companies, and those companies are worth between $9 and $10 billion now. So we believe in the ability of the private sector to respond. The reason we went into, but this is an all of society thing, so whenever I did something like No on 23, we also ran a whole bunch of clean energy propositions in California, but also in other states across the country. Or when I started the largest youth voter mobilization effort in American history, the point was partly what substantially is going to happen. No on 23, we're going to prevent 2 Texas oil companies from rolling back California state energy laws about clean tech and basically, you know, our ability to regulate ourselves and reduce our emissions. California does about half the emissions per capita of other states. But it was also a point that the oil companies can't tell us what to do. In terms of young people voting, it is to have people vote who care about climate. But it is also about young people vote at half the rate of other American citizens. If you want to have a fair representative democracy, we need the young people to vote like other people so their voices are heard comparably, representationally as everyone else, so we have a fairer democracy. So in every case, we were trying to do something substantive, but also something that had a message to it that people might not draw or they might draw. We'd try and make the point, but a lot of times people didn't pay attention to it. But we wanted to feel like substantively we're doing something that absolutely makes a difference in and of itself, and that we hope will be an example of something that shows a broader value system, which we also care about, and if we can get both, then it's a home run.
So let's transition to the current day. So you decided to co-found Galvanized Climate Solutions, which you just mentioned. What does this investment firm do, and why did you choose this as your next step?
So, I basically had started an investment firm called Carolyn Capital for 27 years. And at the same time, I was a partner and on the investment committee of a private equity firm called Hellman & Friedman. And I stopped doing it at the end of 2012, just to focus on being a climate advocate. And I did that for 8 years in a whole bunch of different ways, some of which I was just describing. But I feel like we've won this argument. If you poll people in the United States of America, if you poll registered Republicans in America, and you ask them, should the government make a robust climate response? Depending on how you ask the question, which of course matters in polls, between 57 and 75% of registered Republicans will say yes. And there's always going to be people who say no. I mean, if you do you believe in evolution? 20% of Americans say no. So you're not getting them. They've had a chance to decide whether they believe in evolution. They've had a chance to decide whether they believe in a climate response. They've decided not to. So I felt like really what we need to do is what I was saying at the outset when Tim asked me, how do you see this whole problem? It's like, we need to go into the marketplace and win. That's actually what we need to do. We need to execute on our capabilities on a broad scale and win. And we need to do that, as fast as we can, as big as we can, and scale as broadly as we can. That's the goal. So I felt like, look, I'm a professional investor. I did it for more than 30 years. Okay? This is something that I actually have spent a lot of time trying to understand the scope of this problem, what causes it, what are the different verticals that are important, how tough is it to address them, what are the implications? And I felt like, okay, so it seems like that is an opportunity to pull together the last 40 years of my life and see if I can make a difference in something that I am, of course, incredibly committed to. And, to me, it's, can we broadly bring expertise and money to solve this problem across the investment, across the scope of investment activities? And so that's what we're trying to do.
So let's focus in on real estate. We've got as the title of this, the State of Sustainable Housing Innovation. We at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group now have housing and transportation and energy and environment all under sustainable growth, and housing policy is climate policy as far as I'm concerned. But I wanted to focus on sustainable real estate investments. Why real estate, and what kind of investments are you making in this sector?
So, of the buildings that exist in the United States right now, 80% of them are expecting to be standing in 2050. Real estate is, depending on how you count it, somewhere between a large and a huge emitter of greenhouse gases. So in order for us to, there are 6 big verticals, the built environment's one of them. So if we think that we're gonna solve this problem without addressing that, that cannot happen. So if you think about where we are in that, the answer is, I think we're fairly progressive in terms of new builds. California has a lot of rules about new builds, but as I said, 80% of the buildings that are standing right now will still be in use in 2050. So what we're trying to do is show that you can buy buildings, retrofit them, move them to net zero, and make money doing it. Not make okay money, make more money. Because, we're not going to be able, in our wildest dreams, to buy every building in the United States of America and retrofit it. That ain't happening. What we need to do is show that if you know what you're doing, that there's a playbook to do it that increases your net operating income, increases your attractiveness to tenants, and therefore makes the building more valuable, so that it's better than not doing it. And so, you know, as I said 2 minutes ago, this is about winning in the marketplace. That's what this is about. And everything is about that. So from our standpoint, we need to get better investment returns than other people because we're doing this. And so of course we have to do all the normal real estate things. And let me say, one of the things we're not thinking about doing is, you know, when you think about commercial real estate, a lot of people think that what commercial real estate is office buildings. Well, obviously that's in a huge state of flux. So we're very specifically not addressing that market.
So you have said that every company in the future will be a climate company. What do you mean by that?
So in 1996, I was working as a full-time professional investor, living in San Francisco, California. And it was when the internet started to really pop in terms from an investment standpoint. So I had a friend who was a venture capitalist who I'd gone to both high school and college with, who's a legit friend of mine, and I called him up and said, you know, what will you explain to me, take me through the different internet companies? And he goes, well, let me ask you a question, Tom, before I do that. Do you consider yourself an electricity company? And I said, he said, you turn the lights on in the morning. I said, I'm not an electricity company, Roger, you know that. And he said, well, there's no such thing as an internet company. The internet is a tool that gives people an ability to provide other people information, data, services, products. Every company in this country is going to be an internet company. They just don't know it yet. And that's what I'm saying about climate. If you're in the apparel business, you don't think you're in the climate business, but you are, because you are part of the emissions and understanding what's going on under your aegis that you're responsible for is something that's going to happen. You know, Exxon is an internet company. Every company in the United States at this point is an internet company and is using that tool to be much more efficient and effective. Every company in the United States is going to have to deal with their carbon footprint and their trajectory in carbon. Absolutely. And so that it's just going to be as ubiquitous as the internet.
So as the 2024 presidential race gets underway, which I know it's early, but we have these long cycles in American politics, what's your wish list for a presidential platform on climate?
Well, let's put in perspective for 1 second the United States' role in climate. So the United States is responsible at this point for about 11% of global emissions. And we've said that we're going to try to get that down to 50% of 1990 levels by 2030, which at this point I think we're kind of closer to 40%, maybe 42%. But we're 11.5% of global emissions. So if we solve this whole problem in the United States and do exactly what we say, we're going to get that from 11% to 5.5%. Europe is, by the way, 7%. So if they go in half, it'll be 3.5%. My point being, yes, do we have to do the job that we promised to do in terms of our emissions? Of course we do. And by the way, we're cumulatively the biggest emitter in history. But the role of the United States is definitely going to be as part of leadership in the international community. Because if you look out to the projections of where the emissions are going to be coming between now and 2050 and where the growth is, it's in parts of the world which have not gone through the same development on energy and other things that the United States has. So for instance, India is supposed to have 5 times as much electricity generation in 2050 as they do now. 5x. We are not 5xing our electricity generation between now and 2050, by the way. The Democratic Republic of Congo, which has 100 million people, only has 10 million people who have access to electricity. That's 10x. So the job of the United States, to a great degree, when you think about the solution to these problems, is some combination of technology, finance, and policy. And it is incumbent on us, when you say, what do I want the new administration to be representing? It is an awareness that we absolutely have to lead on technology in specific parts very clearly, and we could go into that in more detail. We have to lead in terms of finance, and really we have to be very clear on policy. So when you think about our role, we have to be credible in our own country. We have to do the job here, or why would anyone trust us? Why will anyone trust us anyway? The biggest political issue in this is that the people in the northern hemisphere have done the polluting, and now they're saying to the people in the southern hemisphere who are suffering more, you're the problem. And the people in the southern hemisphere are like, what are you talking about, man? So getting that right in all those scales, which is policy, technology, and finance, is what we can do, where we can lead, and where we really can be part of the group of people actually very productively, from a positive economic standpoint, giving people solutions that where it's in their interest to do the clean thing.
So we had a panel earlier today on ESG, and I've heard you say some quite strong things about ESG. And the panel was ESG numbers versus the noise. What do you have to say about red state officials engaged in the backlash against ESG efforts?
So ESG is a very, to me, indeterminate term. And we happen to, for very strong personal value, cultural, and economic reasons, believe in having a diverse firm that, and we in fact do, and it's intentional and it will always be true of us. But what I say to people is this: look, we're investing in climate solutions. We believe that solving this problem is a gigantic tailwind to our investment. That it's an absolutely crucial need, which means that the ability for us to scale and the necessity for us to scale these investments is overwhelming. And therefore, what we're doing is looking at data in the future, figuring out how to take advantage of a problem and solve a problem and getting paid for it. And if you don't think that that part of investing, that basically solving human problems, looking at the data and being data-driven is okay, then you're not an investor. Because that's what investing is anticipating a future, taking advantage of problems, solving crucial problems, and getting paid for it. And so if you want to pass a law that says you're not allowed to look into the future and anticipate the future, you're basically saying you can't be an investor, which is just dumb.
Knew we'd get to a good point on that, but agreed. So last question, this has gone fast. Our audience includes Silicon Valley business executives, nonprofit executives, and local elected officials and staff. And what message would you have for each of these groups when it comes to how should we be addressing the climate crisis? What role can they play?
Look, I think this is an all of society response. I also believe, so I think everybody, I say to people, if you're a banker, you should be a banker with an eye to climate. That should be in your head. If you're a recruiter, that should be in your head. If, everybody in this society is going to have to take into account the need for us to come together around this. So I see this for all the people. I've got 4 kids, and they do different things, but everything that they're doing at some level, they have an awareness of this. And one of them's a pediatrician, but in how they vote, in how they use, in their personal lives, in terms of how they work professionally. I view this as an amazing, personally, but also as a Californian and as American, I view this as an amazing opportunity for me and for us. Because, look, we're obviously living in a very divided society, multiple ways. And we have a huge task ahead of us, which we absolutely can succeed in. And that rather than talking, if we go about together solving this problem, that is what actually brings people together. And this is exactly what the United States was built for. Stepping up and doing the right thing in the pinch. So I'm a huge fan of responding to this as a gigantic opportunity for us, definitely from a business sense, because I'm a Stanford MBA, I believe in capitalism, but also very much from a civic sense and a human sense about our society in terms of we as a society can solve this together, and that it will be a reinforcement of the deepest values we have.
I think that's an excellent note to end on. So let's thank Tom yet again for his time today.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom.
I wanted us to give one last big round of applause for Tom Steyer and the rest of our amazing speakers today. We wanted to once again thank our wonderful hosts, Oracle, our thought leader sponsors, Western Digital, as well as our many other sponsors who helped make today possible. So thank you very much. And now what you've all been waiting for, we are going to be moving into the lobby. We have cocktails, we want to have conversations, make more connections. So with that, I will release you, and we hope to see you back here next year for ESS 2024. Thank you, everybody.